Welcome to Late Night Story. When the world goes silent and shadows stretch longer, some stories awaken, whispered only to those still awake. So put on your headphones, turn down the lights, and let me guide you through the quiet hours. If you're listening alone, you're exactly where you need to be. If everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world, don't forget to subscribe before you drift too far into the dark.
Story 1. The hole in my neighbor's roof kept growing. I first noticed it during an early morning run. A blue tarp covered the opening, about 10 by 10 feet. Must be water damage. I thought maybe they need help. I decided to stop by, see if they needed any assistance with the repairs. The sound of scattered footsteps erupted from within as I knocked. I waited several seconds. Then, "Morning," I said, putting on a gentle face. The man was middle-aged, perhaps 50, with pepper-flecked hair and a trimmed beard. He had green eyes and an emaciated face, other than his malnourished features. He seemed normal. "Yes, name's Tony." I smiled and extended my hand. "I live just down the street." He stared at my palm with disgust. I stepped back, embarrassed. "I couldn't help but notice you had a hole in your roof. I'd be happy to check it out. It's supposed to rain next week. Thanks for your concern, but I'll be fine." He started to shut the door. "Wait, I run my own business." I handed him my card. "If you need repairs, I'm available. What's your name?" "Eugene," he said, then shut the door. I stopped by Gladys' place the next morning. At 78 years, she was our oldest resident, aside from a few stray cats that lapped up tuna cans at her door. She was completely alone. "You doing okay, Gladys?" I asked, ducking into the kitchen. "Still breathing," she admitted. I glanced out her kitchen window. Eugene's house was across the street. The hole in his roof was larger. The blue tarp was attached to a green one, encompassing 20 by 20 feet. "You know anything about that house?" "Ah, yes, the spooky place." She adjusted her spectacles. "Never liked the man who lives there. Only comes out on rare occasions. In fact, I've maybe seen him 5 times since he's lived here." I continued on with my week. Each morning I'd go run, then head off to work. I had endless jobs piling up, and the daily exercise helped me de-stress. I was so busy that it took me days to realize the hole on Eugene's roof had quadrupled in size. What the hell? I slowed to a trot. Sure enough, there were different colored tarps arranged all over the roof. It was like a fumigator had set up shop. He's had a serious problem. I mused. How's he gonna take care of it? Call it OCD or curiosity, but I decided to stop by after work, bring in a cup of decaf coffee. If he doesn't want to see me, at least he'll like this treat. My stomach flip-flopped when I spotted Eugene out front, dressed in colorful robes and engaging in a violent dance. His movements were so erratic. He seemed to be participating in a macabre ritual. "Eugene," I called out, slowing my walk to avoid startling him. He stopped and turned, his face masked with a panicked expression. "Is everything all right? Please leave me alone." That night I stopped by Gladys' place. Confusion etched onto my face. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Tony." "I think I have." I thought about what I had seen, sucked my front teeth. I went by Eugene's place. He was all dressed up, doing this terrifying dance. Gladys' eyes clouded over. "He was dancing?" "Yeah, and he seemed in pain." "Get in," Gladys said and pulled me forward. "Wait, what's going on?" "Just get in, and I'll tell you everything." The two of us sat at her table, peering over steaming cups of Earl Grey. "I'm afraid I haven't been fully honest with you, Tony." I wiped sweat from my brow. What could this sweet woman be so worried about? That man at the house isn't just a random neighbor. He's a spirit guide. It's his job to keep evil beings away from our neighborhood. "Evil beings? Are you pulling my leg, Gladys?" "Heavens, no." She waved the comment aside. "Did you know that this entire county used to be indigenous land?" I shook my head. When we drove the people out, something evil took their place. like demons or hateful spirits. Every so often one gets out. People like Eugene use their pain to keep them away. This doesn't make any sense. Gladys pulled the sleeve of her shirt back to reveal hundreds of tiny cuts on her arm. Jesus. I leapt back, bowling over my seat. Why are you showing me this? Because human suffering is the only thing that keeps them away. We all take turns harming ourselves. It's a burden we bear in this community. I was so shaken. This gentle woman who had baked me cakes and shared stories about her grandchildren was unfolding a nightmarish story. So Eugene is scaring the spirits off. The suffering dance is the final step in the process. The chosen undergoes a ritual of torment. At the end, they sacrifice themselves. I'm afraid tonight is the last time we'll see Eugene. I shrank back against the wall in shock. This can't be real. It is. She stood, placed her hands on mine. Most of our neighbors know about this. I wanted to tell you, but you're so kind. I didn't want to burden you. My breath shook as I stared into Gladys' eyes. I peeked over her shoulder to Eugene's house. The lights were on. Wait, Tony. Gladys trailed me as I marched down the street. If you interrupt the session, everything will be lost. By now, most of the neighbors had exited their homes. Some were aware of what I was doing. Others were as innocent as I was. He's going toward the house. A voice shouted, "Don't let him in." I increased my speed, ignoring everything. I had to put an end to this insanity. Hear from Eugene firsthand that this was a cruel joke pulled on the gullible neighbors. By the time I reached his driveway, a large gathering had assembled behind me. Tony, it was Gladys, shaking. "Please, don't go in there." I looked at everyone. Their faces were worn and hardened. A few hands held guns. Some were pointed at me. I backed away, raising my palms. I just want to check on him. Then the front door opened and something came out. Oh, Jesus. It was Eugene. He was nude. Jagged cuts were all over his body. Strange symbols. Wretched diagrams. His eyes were hollow and his breathing faint. He took a few steps toward me, then collapsed, dead. The sacrifice has been rejected. Gladys screamed. The most despairing, wretched sound emitted from the house. I turned, seeing something burst out from the tarp patchworks of the roof. Its body had spider-like limbs and jagged spines along its back. Two bat-like wings stretched out from what appeared to be shoulders. Our judgment is upon us. Gladys fell to her knees, praying. In a burst of chaos, gunshots were fired. Voices begged. People screamed. I felt something lift me by my arms and haul me into the sky. It was the abomination from the roof, soaring higher, clutching me in its crow-black talons. A gaping jaw full of yellow teeth grinned as a forked tongue smacked against my lips, smothering them in cat-like saliva. Take it down. A gunshot rang out, and the behemoth dropped me, screeching, as hot blood poured over my face. When I woke up, I was lying in the street. Gladys' face was over mine. "Tony, you're alive." I sat up. The entire neighborhood was gathered around me. Some familiar faces were missing. Others were bruised and bleeding. What had happened? The spirits accepted their new guide. Gladys croaked, downcast. They've agreed to let us live, as long as we continue our suffering. Our suffering? I glanced to where Eugene's house used to be. The entire building and its surroundings were gone, like a bomb had been dropped on it, leaving only a crater. A searing pain shot through my legs. I pulled up my left pant leg. A diagram of macabre sketches were marked into my flesh. "I'm sorry, Tony," Gladys sighed, "but you're the new vessel." Story 2. My friend died in a horrible prank. I wish I never learned what went wrong. The worst deaths, in my opinion, are accidental. I read last week about a mother who rolled onto her newborn and suffocated it. Every year, toddlers die from being left in hot cars. And then you hear stories of kids playing games, like one boy who hid in an unplugged freezer and suffocated to death during hide and seek. Can you imagine? Can you imagine being the person responsible in any of these situations? To me, this is so much more terrifying than the prospect of the paranormal. I'd much rather be haunted by a ghost than by guilt over unintentionally hurting someone. My husband, Wade, is the opposite. He's unbothered by accidents, but petrified of horror movies about demons or vengeful ghosts. But as I told him, none of those things are real, so why be scared? He counters that accidents are without malice, therefore not as scary as murderous ghosts that might be real. I guess he has a point about the lack of malice. Not about ghosts that might be real. I know they're not, because if they were, my best friend would definitely be haunting me. I guess in some ways, she is. You see, whenever I read about a prank gone wrong, I stop breathing for a moment. I'm choked by guilt. After all these years, I still don't know if it was my fault. I was never charged, and my friends insist I need to stop blaming myself. But how can I? How can I move on, not knowing if it's because of me? Rosa got into the suitcase on her own. Lakeisha and I helped her. We were all drunk, giggling. She was supposed to surprise Bolin. She had a huge crush on him. Let me back up. Let me try to explain. We were at a party. Our friend group had been together for years, and we rented out this lodge. Me. My husband Wade, who back then was just my crush, his buddies Bolin and Tucker and JB, and the girls who were my besties, Lakeisha and Rosa and Kay. There were also some other friends who stopped by who we'd met earlier in the day while hiking. I can't remember their names anymore. What I do remember is that we all had a lot to drink. And Rosa, she was in her flirty phase. Rosa was my best friend, but she wasn't perfect. She was like a butterfly who sips from every flower. A real heartbreaker. Beautiful and passionate. I was a little bit jealous of the attention she had, and also kind of in awe of her. Whoever she was with fell hard, like she was the love of their life. But she never committed. She'd been on again, off again with JB, then seduced Wade, which was kind of bitchy because she knew I had a crush on him. She'd even flirted with bisexuality with Kay. Now, her eyes were on Bolin. I forget whose idea it was for her to hide in the suitcase. Mine or hers. All the luggage was in the basement, because that's where the boys had put it when we'd arrived at the lodge. Lakeisha said something like, "Bolin's suitcase is big enough to hide a body." And that's when Rosa or me had the idea she'd hide in it. And Rosa decided to spice up the prank by wearing lingerie. When Bolin took the suitcase up to his room and opened it, he'd find a sexy surprise. We were stupid, stupid, stupid. None of us had good judgment, especially since we were tipsy. Once Rosa squeezed inside, whining about her hair getting caught in the zipper, Lakeisha and I went to go badger the boys to bring everyone's bags to their rooms. I remember Bolin delivered mine. I was staying outside in a tent with Kay. The lodge didn't have enough bedrooms for everybody, and we wanted to sleep under the stars. Kay had no idea about the prank, and was confused when I kept urging Bolin to go inside and check his bag. Wink, wink. After he left, I told her about Rosa, and because Kay was actually sober, she told me to go make sure Rosa wasn't stuck in there. So I checked to make sure the suitcase wasn't still at the bottom of the stairs. At least, I think I did. But I was drunk. While all of us were sitting outside watching fireworks later, I noticed Bolin missing and asked Wade where he went. Bolin had gone up to his room early. Since he hadn't come back, Lakeisha and I assumed Rosa was in there with him and that her lingerie stunt had worked. In fact, Lakeisha and I were whispering about it all evening, quietly, so as not to make any of the boys jealous. In the morning, when Bolin came down, Lakeisha and I asked him about last night, all smirks. He looked clueless. Then Lakeisha asked where Rosa was, and he was still clueless. But what about his suitcase? Had he opened it? He said someone had shoved all his clothes into the closet in a pile. He wasn't sure why. He assumed he was being pranked or something and hadn't seen his suitcase. "So you never opened it?" asked Lakeisha. Dread bloomed in my belly. Oh God, I thought. Oh God, oh God. Lakeisha was telling him how we'd taken his clothes out, and Rosa had hidden inside, hoping to surprise him in her lingerie, and Bolin blushed and said he was gay. Gay? But his coming out to us hardly even registered, because where was Rosa? None of us knew. We quickly went to wake everyone else up, hoping someone had seen her last night. Oh God, oh God, oh God, I checked. Didn't I check? I swear I checked. Prayers ran through my head. But I was drunk. I wasn't sure if I really had. I went downstairs to the basement. There was the suitcase, still tucked away at the bottom of the stairs. It was exactly where we'd left it when we zipped Rosa inside the night before. Nobody wanted to open the suitcase. The boys argued about who had left it there. JB said he'd lifted it, but noticed how heavy it was and asked someone else to take it. Each of them had thought another of the guys was going to grab it. Bolin didn't think to check because he found his clothes piled in the closet. I'm ashamed to say I went outside when Lakeisha reached for the zipper. Wade came out and joined me. He told me dead bodies, gore, things like that scared him, while the others checked the contents of the suitcase. Wade and I sat outside. As we heard the gasps and whispers of, "Oh God," his fingers gripped mine tightly, and I put my head in my hands and sobbed. She'd suffocated, of course, but it had taken a long time. The police wondered why none of us had heard her gasping for help, but Kay sheepishly told them about the fireworks. A prank gone wrong, authorities ruled. My friend said then, and still say now, that ultimately Rosa was the one most responsible for her own misfortune, that she'd made her own decisions, that all of us were a little guilty, but none of us was wholly responsible for a tragic accident. But it was my hand that closed the zipper. I've lain in bed, thinking about her gasping for air. Why didn't she scream? Why did we hear any muffled shouts? I imagine her, squeezed into the darkness while her pleas for help go unanswered and I can't breathe. But the real reason I'm writing this is because this morning I saw a story in the news about a woman in her underwear found strangled on the beach. My husband switched away from the reporting, and when I asked why, he looked surprised and said he thought it might trigger me. Why? I asked. It wasn't a prank. I thought it might remind you of Rosa. You know, the lingerie. I suppose that aspect was similar. To be honest, that part of the tragedy had never really stuck with me as much. But now, I think about how we all stopped talking about her afterward. How her death was only a blip in the news. No details were released. In our friend group, Rosa's death became a taboo subject. Almost like she'd never been with us at all. We all silently agreed to forget her. But the more I think of that report on the news, the more I'm getting that feeling from that day. That top of the stairs feeling. Like I'm looking down and seeing something I don't want to see. That oh God, oh God, oh God sense of impending dread. And I'm about to be sick. Because Wade dated her, too, and loved her. And I'm more and more certain. I looked down the stairs before the fireworks, and there was no suitcase there. And now I'm wondering, if Wade never saw what was in the suitcase, never picked it up or opened it or moved it, how did he know she was in her lingerie when she died? Story 3. I'd only been overseas on business for 2 weeks. When I got back, someone was in my home, painted to look like our cat, and my family couldn't tell the difference. Hey, get the fuck off my son. I barked, storming towards our couch, suitcase falling to my grasp somewhere along the way. Julie planted a firm hand on my chest as I tried to pass her, asking what my problem was. She insisted that I must be exhausted from the flight, that I wasn't thinking straight, but I could feel the subtext. The insinuation was as plain as day. She thought I was ass over tits drunk, or worse, right in front of our son. Something I promised never to be guilty of again. Heat gathered under my shirt collar. A flush crept up my face. I was sober. Stone cold sober. Dry as a goddamn ditch. I mean, she was the one who'd allowed that freak into our home. She was the one who was letting them lounge on our kid's lap like nothing was wrong. How did I know she wasn't on something? Wordlessly, I ripped Julie's hand away and rushed past her. Dad! Dad, what's the matter? It's just Roger, Dad. Tears began flooding. It hurt to make Ike upset, yes, but that hurt was nothing compared to the fear I felt, the raw, blistering confusion of it all. It was the gentle sparks of a firecracker versus the roiling fireball of a ballistic missile. No contest. I loomed over brown leather sectional. Ike slid out from under them and scampered over the top of the couch. sprinting into his mother's trembling arms as soon as his feet hit the floor. The person dressed to look like our house cat didn't even react. Knees to their chest, curled and comfortable, they place a painted, 5-finger hand up to their mouth and rub their palm against their mask. I suppose they were simulating self-cleaning, but the mask didn't have a hole for a tongue to come out of, so their skin just squeaked against the material. My eyelids twitched. Icy sweat drenched my back. I looked to my wife for answers, but she just seemed terrified. Terrified of me. What is this? I whispered, knuckles collapsing into a fist. Ike whimpered. My wife raked his beach blonde hair, silent, wide-eyed. Who is this, Julie? The dry, crackling scream sent her dashing to the kitchen table, where her phone was resting. Ike transitioned into full-on hysteria, and, very much like a cat, the intruder appeared perfectly indifferent to our mounting duress. They stopped full licking their palm and stretched wide, shifting their stomach toward me, unafraid, unbothered, unprotected. I stared at them, disbelief running dizzy laps around the base of my skull. They were around 5 feet tall, mass included, which was circular, stout, flattened at the top, triple the size of a human skull, and circumferentially smooth. The shape reminded me of the box I used to store my extra drum cymbals. Our Calico's likeness had been meticulously painted across the mask. Her emerald green eyes, the black splotch surrounding her light pink nose, the ragged edges of her left ear. It was all there and accounted for. To fit the mask's bizarre dimensions, however, those familiar features needed to be distorted. Everything was a little too wide and a little too big. It was the same with her gaunt, emaciated body. They'd faithfully translated the markings of her fur onto their skin, stretching the pattern to fit over their ghoulish proportions. A patch of white over their sunken, craterous abdomen, speckles of soft orange along their forearms, extremities with the cords of tendon revoltingly visible because of the way their thin skin wrapped tightly around their fatless frame. Worst of all, they were naked. No genitals, though. The crease was sleek and seamless. Like a Ken doll, my rage boiled over. I descended, ready to cave their chest in with my bare hands. Marvin, Jesus Christ, it's just a cat. Get a hold of yourself. Julie blared. My fist halted inches from their breastbone. They didn't flinch. I creaked upright so I could see my wife's eyes. You think they're a cat? You think this is Raja? Ike was beyond hysterics at that point, shrieking, inconsolable, face pressed hard into her pant leg. Julie didn't answer. She pulled Ike away, into another room, urgently muttering to the 911 dispatcher. Yes, he's on something, or drunk, or sick. I don't know. Just get someone over here. My mouth felt dry. I ran a quivering hand through my sweat-caked hair, slicking it back. Wanted to look somewhat presentable when the police arrived. All the while, they loafed on the couch, sleeping, smiling, laughing, watching, waiting. I couldn't tell. The mask had no holes, and they never spoke. I stood in front of the couch, lightly swaying, an empty swing shivering in a cold wind, observing patches of painted skin sinking between their brittle ribs as they exhaled. How can they breathe? I wondered, given that the plastic edges of the mask seemed to be continuous with their neck. I was no closer to an answer to that question when the police arrived a few minutes later. I implored them to arrest the intruder, begging them to see reason, praying their view matched my own. They looked at the thing on my couch and snickered, eyes gleaming with amusement. I shouldn't have expected them to take the request seriously. How could I? It was just a cat, after all. The police graciously escorted me to the emergency room. Not in cuffs, thankfully. Not that time. All the tests were unremarkable. The clear fluid they drew from my spine didn't show signs of an infection agitating my nervous system. The urine drug screen came back positive, but only for opioids, and the doctor expected that, given I was on naltrexone. The med helped dull any residual cravings for my old vices, alcohol and cocaine, but shared a chemical similarity to oxycodone. My kidneys, my heart, my liver, every organ seemed to be in working order. Far as the doctor could tell, there wasn't anything wrong with me, and I hadn't ingested anything they believed could inspire psychosis. But when the psychiatrist asked, I remained insistent. That thing wasn't a cat. From there, my trajectory was set. Next stop, Falling Leaves Behavioral Health Hospital. The first time wasn't too bad. My fellow captives were tolerable, and the docs were nice enough. Smart, too. They eventually had me believing I was suffering under an isolated delusion precipitated by extreme stress. Their words, not mine. Initially, I rejected the theory. The more I considered it, though, the more it seemed to click into place. Undeniably, work had been taxing, and no one else saw Raja as I did. Occam's razor suggested something was wrong with me, rather than everyone else. Not Julie, and not the police. Just me. 5 days later, I was discharged. Ike was ecstatic, jumping up and down in the back seat of our sedan, wrapping a pair of little hands around my shoulders as I clicked the passenger seat safety belt into the holster. Julie was more reticent about my release, but she did a good job faking happiness for Ike's sake. I was the last to enter when we got home. My feet felt thickly calcified to our stone stoop. It took Julie holding my hand to get me inside, practically yanking me over the threshold. The door swung shut behind me. Electricity sizzled up the curves of my neck as I scanned my surroundings. Julie ran her thumb delicately across my palm. The massage was tender and affectionate, but I sensed a similar electricity hissing along her skin. She was nervous too, and in retrospect, she had every right to be. I saw no masked intruder. My static calmed. I turned to Julie and shot her a flimsy smile. Then there was a noise above us. A quiet, inscrutable message. A painful reminder. Knock, knock, knock. My body became a live wire. Julie's thumb dug vicious stigmata into my palm, having sensed my panic. I glanced up, and there they were, lying prone on the balcony that overlooked our foyer, all but their masks wreathed in deep shadow, knocking the poor, oversized facsimile of Raja's skull against the banister's small wooden pillars, alternating left to right to left, left to right. Knock, knock, knock. The lead psychiatrist at Falling Leaves informed me I went absolutely ballistic at the mere sight of our innocent house cat, and that my stay the second time around would be longer, much longer. I don't recall going ballistic, though I have no memory of what transpired between seeing them again and the point at which I arrived at the psychiatric hospital. All I remember is their terrible, pendulous way, extending on into infinity, a video on a frozen computer screen, constantly refreshing but never righting itself, never moving on, perpetually misaligned and distorted. A part of me never left that moment. A part of me is still there, watching, helpless. Knock, knock, knock. Julie still visited me over the following 3 months, but only weekly, and she wasn't bringing Ike with her. Not only that, but judging by the way her cheekbones had begun progressively sharpening, she wasn't eating. The stress of it all was getting to her, and that fact killed me. At first, I pleaded, said things like, "I'm not insane. I know what I saw." And, "For the love of God, Julie, you and Ike aren't safe." All she did in response was avert her gaze. My pleas were falling on deaf ears, and the only thing those outbursts were earning me was a longer sentence at Falling Leaves Behavioral Health Hospital. It was a tough pill to swallow, but I realized that feigning recovery from my delusion was the most logical step forward. So that's what I did. Slowly but surely, I recovered. Even endorsed during a group therapy session that I've been covertly indulging in some designer. PCP-like drugs that wouldn't come up on a routine test, but certainly could send a mind to the proverbial garbage disposal. The psychiatrist seemed to buy it, hook, line, and sinker. 108 grueling days later, my wife brought me home. Her lips twitched as she drove. Her eyes were glassy and bloodshot. She'd lost a significant amount of weight. 20 pounds, maybe more. They were right inside the door when I opened it, preening on their back beside our welcome mat, body contorted into a lazy stretch, silently beseeching a stomach scratch. I watched her anxiety flourish into outright panic, knees fluttering, breathing sharp and shallow. Her eyes flashed to me, then to what she saw as our defenseless cat, and back again, petrified about what I might do. Before she could pull her phone from her bag, I was bending down, rubbing my fingers against their belly. Its skin was doughy but disturbingly coarse, like partially congealed flour with grains of asphalt mixed into the batter. As I suppressed a gag, I felt the silky touch of Julie's hand on my shoulder. "So good to have you back, Marvin," she whispered. I nodded, still rubbing. The dead eyes of their painted mask pointed at me. Julie walked away. As soon as she was out of earshot, I stood up and retracted my hand, which was now coated in a fine gray, odorless dust. Something was different about them. Their abdomen seemed fuller than before. The solution to this mess, as I imagined it, appeared relatively straightforward. I didn't need to understand them. I didn't need to know what they were, why only I could appreciate their true form, and what their purpose in my home was. I just needed to kill them. Thus, I needed my family incapacitated, unable to intervene. So I dosed them 1 milligram of lorazepam for Ike, 4 milligrams of lorazepam for Julie. For the record, benzodiazepines were never my vice. I mean, who wants to sleep through their high? Never made much sense to me. Still, I had use of them outside of hedonism as a sort of biochemical kill switch. Having the shakes from alcohol withdrawal? Take a lorazepam. Coke got you a little too revved up? Take a lorazepam. Thankfully, I was able to locate a dusty pill bottle stashed under a floorboard in the attic, a relic from my days as a fiend. It wasn't as dramatic as something like chloroform. They both just became incredibly drowsy after downing some spiked lemonade. Neither very interested in having leftovers prior to turning in for the evening. I helped them up the stairs, and that was that. Both were out like a light in no time. Ike told me he loved me. Julie reminded me to feed Raja 3 times. She might have her suspicions in the morning, and I figured she'd be distraught to find Raja missing, but I crossed that bridge when I came to it. As I drew Ike's bedroom door closed, there they were, lying on their belly in the hallway, absent-mindedly flicking water around their bowl with their seemingly nailless human fingers. That moment was the first pleasurable one I'd experienced since the whole damn ordeal began. They were making it easy for me. I tiptoed across the carpet, gaze ripe with beautiful violence, and when I was close enough, I knelt down and straddled the intruder. They writhed, attempting to get out from under me. It was no use. Only then did I experience a brief, smoldering curiosity about what was hidden beneath. I clasped my hands at the point where its mask and neck became indistinguishable, and began wrenching it upwards. A deluge of endorphins set my blood on fire. My entire body radiated blissful warmth. This fever dream was finally going to be over. When the mask started to give, as threads of anchoring sinew started to snap, that's when I heard their howls. Both Julie and Ike wailing in discordant unity. Paternal instinct got me upright. Before my conscious mind could even register the circumstances, I was kneeling beside my son. He was sitting straight up, shoulders tense to hell and back, eyes rolled into his skull, and God, there was blood. Tiny crimson dewdrops formed a ring around his neck, exactly where I'd been tearing at the mask. His screams grew fainter. After a few seconds, he fell back limply onto his pillow, almost as if he'd passed out from within a dream. Only then did the wails completely die out. Then, the house was utterly silent. Julie had stopped too. Whatever I did to them, it seemed to translate to my family. They were connected, tethered. I turned around, nearly toppling back onto Ike from the shock of what I saw. They were there, in the doorway, standing on 2 feet. Roger stretched, vacant-faced stared daggers into me. Gradually, he got back on all fours, pawed past me, climbed onto Ike's bed, and curled up at his feet. And I just stood there, paralyzed. The message was obvious. They didn't need a voice for me to understand. Checkmate. The next morning, as I stewed over a mug of lukewarm coffee at the kitchen table, Julie approached me holding her pillowcase. "Hey, glad to see you up so early." I nodded, keeping my eyes fixed on the black liquid. "What do you make of these stains?" "Smells a hell of a lot like blood, and it wasn't there before I went to bed. I thought I saw some dried blood on my neck, but I looked myself up and down in the mirror, and it doesn't seem like I have a scratch on me. I don't know, it's just weird." She dropped the pillowcase onto the table and returned to her morning routine. A blotchy, maroon-colored oval marred the light blue fabric, no bigger than a quarter. Flecks of coagulation dislodged as I scraped my thumbnail over the stain, but as I put it to my nose and sniffed, I didn't detect even a hint of that sickly sweet iron kiss scent. Yup, smells like blood to me. Strange, I replied, draping the pillowcase over the top of a nearby chair. Right. She paced out into the foyer and began calling for Ike. After years of snorting cocaine, my sense of smell was effectively non-existent. Rarely I'd get a faint whiff of something, but it'd have to be exceptionally fragrant to wake up my fried nerves, and it was always fleeting. Julie didn't know that, though. I was used to lying about it. Too embarrassed to reveal the lengths to which I'd ravaged my body at the altar of feeling good. My eyes darted to the pantry. There was a muffled tapping coming from the inside. The clack of my wife's heels echoed as she moved to open the door. The intruder spilled out, mask thudding against the floor, cans of beans and boxes of spaghetti toppling over like bowling pins. "Roger, you goof, there you are," Julie cooed. They got on all fours and began shaking violently, airing out their hypothetical fur, causing a cloud of pale dust to collect around them. Once settled, they tilted their mask up to look at my wife. She stared back at them, silent, grinning. After a moment, she turned to me and said, "Wow, he is vocal today, good Lord." At no point did I hear anything from them. Julie paced out of the kitchen, chuckling to herself. I glared at the intruder. They had everyone else fooled, and I couldn't seem to pinpoint what made me so damn special. Suddenly, I had an idea. What if something in my blood was allowing me to see through the illusion? Could I be genetically immune? I pulled my phone from my pocket, walked up to them, and snapped a quick picture. Then I texted my brother. "Free for dinner tonight?" Ike would love to see his uncle. Dan and I weren't estranged, but we weren't on great terms, either. He lived about an hour away and had his own shit to deal with. More than that, though, I'd said some things better left unsaid while still in the throes of substance abuse. He kept me at arm's length ever since. I towered over the indecipherable devil, the haunting melody of my spellbound wife and son laughing upstairs, thumping against my eardrums. My hand buzzed. "Sure, good to hear from you. Car's out of commission. Mind picking me up?" "Happy to," I replied. Then, with no context, I forwarded him the picture I'd just taken and waited. The dots of a pending reply appeared across my phone screen. My heart racketed around my ribcage. My life teetered on what he saw. What the fuck is that, Marv?" Relief washed over me. "Tell you more later. Be there at 5. I peered down at them and smiled wide, baring my teeth. Most of the trip home from Dan's was silent. I was too nervous to hold a conversation, manically tapping on the steering wheel, thoughts spinning as we were pulling off the interstate. He broke that silence, but not in the way I was expecting. "Hey, you haven't taken anything, right? Still on the wagon, so to speak?" he asked. Automatically, I responded. "What?" "No. God, I wish." Each small word came out swift and punctuated. Even with just my peripheral vision, I could tell he was giving me that look, a pitying condescension that always felt like a splash of acid gnawing at my skin. The type of look that used to reliably throw me into a rage at a moment's notice. I swallowed and rolled my shoulders, focused my attention on the heat from the setting sun cascading to the windshield, rather than the resentment sizzling in my veins. Things at home have been better, I sighed. Talk about an understatement. But what else could I say? Where would I even start? I lost my job. I was in a psychiatric hospital for months. There's a demon eunuch dressed as my house cat. And only I can tell? No. He'd think I'd gone off the deep end. Once he saw it for himself. Then I'd be able to spill my guts. Once he understood, then we could strategize. I'm sure it's not as bad as you. He paused, sniffing the air. A bout of harsh, vigorous coughing took hold of him. His eyes became glassy and red. I considered pulling over by our town's welcome sign, but he waved for me to keep going as I flicked my turn signal on. "Sorry," he sputtered. "Allergies really have been a bitch this year." The fit abruptly dissipated. When I looked over, he didn't seem concerned, and his breathing was steady, so I just kept going. A minute later, we pulled into my driveway. He asked one last question as we walked up the stoop, the final glimmers of orange twilight fading away above our heads. "Oh, almost forgot. What the hell was that picture you sent me? Shit was cursed. Nearly fell out of my chair when it popped up, he chuckled. I pretended not to hear him and opened the front door. Hours passed before dinner was ready. We chatted, gave Dan copious updates about Ike, and even had time to play a few games of backgammon while the roast cooked. He continued to cough, but the fits were smaller, more contained. Honestly, he didn't even seem to notice them. All the while, Raja never showed their face. Dread crawled over my skin like termites through wood, but I kept my cool. They'd come. Around 8, the four of us sat down to eat. Lines of steam rose above the glistening pile of meat at the center of the table. Ike wanted to come off as a proper gentleman, insisted on serving us, dropping asymmetric portions of beef, mashed potatoes, and baked asparagus across each of our plates. All right, dig in, Julie announced. My son descended ravenously. Still on edge, I gingerly mixed the gravy into potatoes, eyes darting between each of the 3 entrances to our kitchen. That's when I noticed something peculiar about Julie. She was holding her utensils upright, a fork in one hand, a knife in the other. But she wasn't moving, eyes locked on me but glazed over. Honey, everything okay? The only part of her that budged was her lips. Why wouldn't I be? Stomach twisting into agonizing knots. I turned to Dan. He was swiping at the meal, but every time his fork missed. A little too high, a little too far left. Over and over and over again. Julie, this turkey is something else, he muttered. Something was desperately wrong. Abruptly, my wife released her grip, utensils clattering against the plate. Wow, I am stuffed, she proclaimed. Julie sprang from her chair. Might as well give Roger the leftovers. She balled her hand into a fist, brought it close to her face, and began knocking on her forehead. The resulting sound had an unnaturally pervasive resonance, like hot water running through a loose copper pipe, metal expanding and colliding against a nearby wall. Knock, knock, knock. A series of wild thuds emanated from the foyer, a bevy of hands and feet and knees crashing down the stairs. The frenzied stampede of a starving animal. As the masked intruder charged into the room, Julie walked over to his dinner bowl and dumped the entire meal into it, pieces haphazardly ricocheting onto the side of the cabinet and the surrounding floor. Suddenly, I realized I hadn't seen her eat anything substantial since I left for that trip months prior. A few slices of toast with her coffee in the morning, but nothing more. Dan pivoted to face them as they entered. I held my breath. He swung to me. His eyes were rolled back into his skull. White balls of tapioca adorned with latticework of bright capillaries, tiny red worms wading through a thick ooze. I was wondering when the little guy would show up. I've missed him. My heart buckled. My mind fractured. Identically. My brother sprung to his feet, grabbed his plate, and dumped in front of them. Might as well give Roger the leftovers. Pets have to be fed, and we don't want Ike to be the one to feed them, right? No, of course not. We want the best for our prodigy. We want them to grow. We them want to thrive. Right? Right? The intruder hastily gathered the tribute into their arms, gravy smearing an impromptu Rorschach test along their trunk, and then began galloping past the table. At some point, Ike had gotten up and was standing by the screen door, creaking it open so they could careen into the backyard without losing an ounce of momentum. For months, this must have been the routine. Looking at Ike, I found myself at a crossroads. I could just give up, allow my family to be eaten away from the inside out, until there was nothing left, until they'd been made hollow. Hell, it wouldn't be hard, and who knows? Weak and empty. They might not even have the brain power to notice if indulged in a vice or two on the side. A family that would stick around no matter what I did to myself. I wanted that at some point, right? Or I could give chase to that incomprehensible thing, that fucking parasite, even if it felt hopeless, completely and utterly insurmountable. I could still try. Blood thrumming, heart burning. I shot up and followed them into the moonless night. It's currently 11 p.m. When I finally arrived home, Ike and Julie were sleeping soundly, and Dan was gone. But I don't know where he got to, since I drove him. There are holes in the forest, burrows, tunnels. I watched the intruder dive into one, still holding the food. When I put my ear to the hole, I heard something. Mewing. Multiple identical, high-pitched yowls, overlaid with each other. Sounded exactly like Raja when we forgot to fill his bowl. Hungry begging, but an eerie triplicate. I never considered what happened to the real him until that moment. If that is truly our original house cat, deep in the hole. That's not all, though. On the way back, I passed by Mr. Hooper. He lives 2 doors down from us. He was walking what he believed was his husky. The man looked like he'd dropped 30 pounds since I last saw him. It's not just happening to my family. I think the whole town is infested. Not sure what to do next. Search for Dan? Return to the hole? It's unclear, but I'll figure it out. I'm publishing this in case something happens to me. Julie, if you're reading this, I'm not crazy. I love you, and I tried. Story 4. My manipulative ex sent me a box full of apologies 5 years after we broke up. The problem is, she died a year ago. It's been 5 years. 5 years since I finally, painfully and messily, extracted myself from that relationship. It was one of those relationships that doesn't just end. It leaves a crater. She was my first real love, and she was a master of quiet, insidious kind of cruelty. A manipulator of the highest order. Every argument was my fault. Every insecurity I had was a weapon she would sharpen and use against me. By the end, I was a hollowed-out, anxious wreck of a person. It took me years of therapy, of rebuilding my own self-worth from the ground up, to feel even remotely normal again. I hadn't seen or spoken to her in half a decade. I thought I was free. Then, last month, the box arrived. It was a small, unassuming package in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name and address, written in a familiar, elegant, sharp cursive that I recognized instantly. A cold, heavy feeling, a ghost of an old anxiety, settled in my stomach. Her handwriting, on a small, cardboard tag tied to the box with a black ribbon, were 7 words, also in her hand. For all the things I should have said, my first instinct was to throw it away, unopened, to just toss in the dumpster and pretend it never came. But I couldn't. The curiosity, the morbid need for a final, long overdue sense of closure was too strong. I took it inside. The box itself was beautiful. It was a small, ornate thing, carved from a dark, heavy wood, with intricate patterns of vines and leaves winding around its sides. It felt old, ancient even. I sat at my kitchen table, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, and I lifted the lid. Inside, the box was empty. It was lined with a deep, dark, light-absorbing velvet. There was no letter, no trinket, no explanation. Just an empty, velvet-lined box. I felt a surge of frustrated, familiar anger. Of course. Even now, 5 years later, she was still playing games, sending a cryptic, beautiful, and ultimately empty gesture. It was so perfectly her. I put the box on a bookshelf in my living room, a strange, dark little monument to a past I was trying to forget, and I did my best to put it out of my mind. The next morning, I was getting ready for work. I walked past the bookshelf, and something caught my eye. There was a small, folded piece of white paper sitting in the center of the box's dark velvet lining. I froze. I knew, with an absolute certainty, that the box had been empty when I went to bed. My apartment door was locked. No one had been in. My hands were trembling as I reached for it. I unfolded the paper. On it, in that same sharp, elegant cursive, was a single sentence. "I'm sorry for making you feel small at that dinner party with your friends." I stared at the note, my mind reeling. The dinner party. It had been 7 years ago. A small gathering at a friend's apartment. She had spent the entire night subtly, skillfully, undermining me in front of my oldest friends, making me but a dozen gentle jokes that left me feeling like an idiot. I had almost forgotten about it. but the apology was so specific. So verbatim to the conversation we'd had in the car on the way home, where I had used those exact words. You made me feel small. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, the note folded in my pocket, a strange, hot coal against my leg. When I got home from work, I went straight to the bookshelf. There was another note. I'm sorry for reading your journal. My blood ran cold. She had always sworn she hadn't. It had been a huge fight, a suspicion I could never prove. But here it was, a confession, a posthumous admission of guilt. I checked again an hour later. Another note. I'm sorry for lying about where I was that night. This was the rhythm of my life for the next week. The box became an endless, automated apology machine. Every time I looked, a new note, a new folded piece of paper, a new shard of our toxic past would be waiting for me. At first, it was cathartic, validating. Every note was a confirmation that I hadn't been crazy. The gaslighting, the manipulation, it had all been real. It was like all the old wounds I were finally being lanced, the poison drained away. I'm sorry I told your mother you were the one who broke her antique vase. I'm sorry I flirted with your best friend at your birthday party. I'm sorry I made you quit your painting class. But then, the apologies started to get darker, more intrusive. I'm sorry for watching you while you slept. I found that one on a Saturday morning. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. I remembered waking up sometimes in the dead of night with the feeling of being watched, only to see her lying beside me, her eyes closed. I had always dismissed it as a dream. I'm sorry for putting that keylogger on your laptop. That one explains so much. The way she always seemed to know what I was thinking, who I was talking to, the way she would bring up things from private emails, pretending it was just a lucky guess. I'm sorry I followed you to work that day you said you were sick. The box wasn't just apologizing for the things I knew about. It was revealing a secret, hidden history of stalking and violation, a level of obsession and control that I had never even suspected. The catharsis was curdling into a deep, creeping horror. It was an invasion, a reopening of a past that was far more monstrous than I had ever realized. I had to get rid of it. I took the box, my hands shaking with a mixture of fear and rage, and I threw it in the dumpster behind my apartment building. I watched it disappear under a pile of trash bags. I felt a sense of finality, of relief. The next morning, it was back on my bookshelf. It was sitting in the exact same spot, polished and pristine, and inside a new note was waiting. I'm sorry you tried to throw me away. Panic, a raw, frantic animal panic, began to set in. I took the box out to my small concrete patio, and I took a hammer to it. I swung with all my might. The hammer had connected with the dark wood with a loud crack and bounced off, leaving not so much as a scratch. The wood was impossibly, unnaturally hard. The hammer, however, had a new dent in its head. The box was a part of my life now, an unmovable, unbreakable, and unending source of my past poison. And then the apologies started to change. They started to become predictive. One morning, a note appeared that was different. It was about the future. I'm sorry for what the man on the bus is about to say to you. I stare at the note, a sense of profound, dizzying wrongness washing over me. An hour later, on my commute to work, the bus lurched and a large, angry-looking man stumbled and spilled his coffee. He turned and glared at me, even though I was a full 3 feet away. "Watch where you're going, you idiot," he snarled, his voice full of bizarre, unearned venom. The box wasn't just dredging up the past anymore. It was predicting or maybe even causing new negativity in my life and then apologizing for it. The notes became a mix of past and present. I'm sorry I dented your father's car and let you take the blame. I'm sorry for the flat tire you're going to get this afternoon. I'm sorry I told all our friends your novel was just a stupid hobby. I'm sorry your boss is going to lose an important file. It was a constant, unending stream of misery, both remembered and newly delivered. I was living in a psychic minefield, with a box as my own personal, malevolent fortune teller. I had to talk to her. I had to stop this. I dug through my old contacts, my fingers feeling like clumsy sausages, and I found her number. I hadn't deleted it. I just never looked at it. I called. It went straight to a disconnected tone. I tried her social media. Her profiles were all gone, deactivated. I was getting desperate. I called one of our old mutual friends, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. "Hey," I said, my voice shaking. "This is going to sound really, really weird, but I need to get in touch with her. It's an emergency. Do you have a new number for her?" There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. Are you okay?" my old friend finally asked, his voice full of a strange, cautious concern. "Yeah, I'm fine. I really need to talk to her." Another pause. "Dude," he said, his voice soft. "She's dead. She died a year ago." The phone slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. I just stood there, the blood roaring in my ears. Dead. She was dead. A car accident. My friend's tinny voice continued from the floor. "It was really awful. I thought you knew. Her parents sent out an announcement." I hung up. She was dead. For a year. But the box had arrived a month ago. And the notes, they were still coming. I stumbled to the bookshelf. The box was there, a dark, silent void, and inside a new, folded note. I picked it up with a hand that was so numb I could barely feel the paper. "I'm sorry I died." My mind shattered. The last fragile barrier between the rational world and this impossible, waking nightmare dissolved completely. This wasn't a sick prank. This wasn't a final manipulative game. This was something else. Something from beyond the grave. I'm writing this now because I don't know what else to do. I am trapped. The notes haven't stopped, but they're different now. They're no longer just apologies for the life we shared. They're dispatches, postcards from whatever hell she's in, and they are more terrifying than any of her earthly cruelties. This morning there were 3. "I'm sorry I was thinking of you when I died. I was holding this box." That one made me physically ill. I was the last thought in her head. And somehow, in that final moment, she had tethered this thing to me. "I'm sorry the sky is red here. I'm sorry the people here don't have hearts. They just have empty spaces." The last note, the one that is sitting on my desk right now, the one that has finally pushed me to write this, to scream into the void and pray someone has an answer, arrived an hour ago. "I'm sorry. I have to go now." The one with the smiling face is coming for me again. I don't know what to do. I think I am tied to a ghost, and her only connection to the living world is me. The box is on my bookshelf, and I know, with a certainty that is slowly crushing the life out of me, that a new note is already waiting. And I am so afraid to read it. Story 5. Needles in the Haystack. Every year, in the weeks leading up to Halloween, my mom used to take my sister and I to the pumpkin patch at Woolbach Farm. It was a popular seasonal attraction, a family-owned vegetable farm about a half-hour's drive from the suburbs where I grew up in Missouri. Many locals remember it fondly, but I recently learned that I am the reason it was shut down for good. One of the biggest attractions at Woolbach Farm was the Haystack Maze. They had a haunted hayride and pumpkin carving and corn mazes too. Every upstanding pumpkin patch does. But only Woolbach touted a pair of monumental, sprawling haystack mazes as the main event. Most haystack mazes are nothing to write home about. The walls are usually only a few feet high, so short that most kids are able to peer over the top of them. But the haystack mazes at Woolbach were different. These were massive, fully enclosed structures. Skeletons made of wooden pallets and chicken wire with bales of hay stacked all around to form a series of branching tunnels on the inside. Giant straw pyramids. A bona fide feat of farmhand engineering. There were 2 mazes, a smaller one for younger kids and a bigger, more complicated one for teenagers. Of course, I wanted to go in the bigger one, but anyone younger than 13 had to be accompanied by somebody older. My big sister clearly thought she was too grown up for the whole pumpkin patch thing, opting to sit on one of the swing sets and pick away at her Game Boy, while my mom joined me on an exhibition of the kids' maze. She held my hand, as we ducked through the main entrance of the maze. The opening led straight into a central area with the first tunnel attached to it. It was much bigger than any other space inside the pyramid, with enough headroom that even an adult could stand straight up. Since the haystack maze had a roof made of wooden pallets and hay, it was pitch black inside. I was 10 at the time and a bit of a scaredy cat, for years younger than my sister, and deeply afraid of the dark. As scared as I was at the darkness of the haystack maze, I was excited for the opportunity to try out my new flashlight. It was just a small plastic piece of shit that they gave to all of the kids at my dad's company barbecue. But I was absolutely blown away by it. The flashlight was hand-powered. A small crank protruded from the back, and that you had to turn to charge up the battery. This was well before smartphones came around, so it was a perfect breed of gimmicky device to boggle my early 2000s kid mind. Watch this. I flicked my flashlight on, extremely proud of how bright it was. I had spent the whole car ride there winding it up, getting as much juice in it as possible. My mom acted super impressed. I stuck to her like glue for the first few minutes. The tunnels were much smaller than the first room, meant to be navigated by crouching or crawling. Some tunnels had wooden ramps leading up to a second level. Eventually I got more comfortable and started running ahead, scoping out possible dead ends while my mom crawled behind me. Even with my mom there, it felt a little eerie. Being surrounded on all sides by thick bales of hay had a sort of noise-canceling effect. All the footsteps around us sounded muffled, and I could clearly hear my own breathing despite being surrounded by other kids. The air was hot and stuffy and claustrophobic. The kids' maze was well occupied, but there were still some empty pockets here and there, routes that were clearly dead ends after just a few steps. I made a point to check every nook and cranny. As I peered around the corner of one of these dead ends, the beam of my flashlight met a sight that made my heart drop. A small boy sat huddled in the corner, facing away from me. His shoulders shook, and he whipped his head around as soon as I appeared. My flashlight hit his face, and I saw tears on his cheeks. He looked only a year or two younger than myself, clearly overstimulated by the whole affair. He brought his knees closer up to his chin and silently wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "Hi, honey." My mom had caught up with me. "Are you lost?" She had the sweetest voice. The boy nodded. "Is your mom with you?" He shook his head, fresh tears welling up in his eyes. I could tell he was embarrassed, and I felt bad for him. "We're lost too," I said, holding my hand out. The boy smiled, took my hand and picked himself off the ground. "What's your name?" my mom asked. "Henry." "Nice to meet you, Henry. Do you have a flashlight?" "It died." He held out a small Buzz Lightyear-themed flashlight and flipped the switch to demonstrate how its batteries had failed him. "That's okay. Simon can share his. Right, Simon?" I nodded, jumping at any excuse to show off my favorite gadget. "You know," my mom said leadingly, "there's a secret trick we can use to find our way out of here." Henry and I leaned in. My mom stuck her right hand out to the side, touching the wall of hay next to her. "This maze isn't very big. There's only so many ways we can go. We only get lost if we lose track of what we've checked already. So if we pick one wall and keep following it no matter what, we'll find our way out." Looking back, her method was far from perfect. The stick to one wall approach might work if you applied it from the very start of the maze, but because we were already inside, the wall to our right could have easily been a freestanding divider fully contained within. Doing this could have led us in circles if the maze were complex enough. Fortunately for us, the kids' maze was intentionally straightforward. With the three of us sticking to one wall, we found the exit in just a few minutes. Henry's mother was waiting for us on the other side, looking worried. She exchanged niceties with my mom, thanking her for helping Henry out. She said that he had insisted on tackling the maze without her. I felt a sting of shame knowing that this kid who was younger than me had proven himself more independent. Henry and I spent the rest of the day running around together. We did the corn maze, sat next to each other on a hayride, even went back to the kids' haystack maze again. I used to get picked on a lot, so it was nice to make a new friend outside of school. After making our way out of the kids' maze a third time, we decided that we were ready for something more challenging. We begged our moms to take us inside the bigger maze, but they waved away the idea, tuck her out from a day's events. What if Zoe took us? I asked, prompting my sister to tear her attention away from Fire Emblem for the first time all day. Right. Like I want to go running around in the dark with a couple of kids. Zoe's words cut me, though I don't think she meant for them to come out as harshly as they did. Upon seeing my face fall, she begrudgingly agreed to join us. A freckle-faced farm boy wearing a Grim Reaper cloak over his blue jeans stood watch at the entrance of the PG-13 haystack maze. He told Zoe to stay by our sides at all times. This maze started just like the kids' maze, with a big open chamber and a single tunnel leading forward, though there was a clear sense of larger scale. Zoe plopped down on a haystack bench and flipped her Game Boy back open. "Hey, aren't you coming with us?" I stuttered. "Why did you want to do this if you're too chicken shit to go in yourself?" she groaned. Henry shifted uncomfortably on the balls of his feet. "I'm not chicken shit," I said, puffing my chest out. "Just come get me when you're done," she said. "Won't that guy know you didn't stay with us when we go back to the front?" She laughed. "Like I care about getting in trouble with some hick." And with that, I flicked my flashlight back on. Henry and I steeled ourselves and set off down the first tunnel. Right off the bat, I could tell there were way less people in this maze. Faint footsteps from above were few and far between. We only passed one other group of people after the first fork. A teenage boy eyed us down as we passed, likely guessing we weren't supposed to be there alone. Henry's company washed away a lot of the unease, but I quickly realized that we were in over our heads. It didn't take long for us to get turned around. "Maybe we should go back and try from the start," said Henry. "Nah," I said, not wanting to admit that I didn't remember the route we took. "This place isn't that big. I bet we're almost there." We passed the same group of teenagers again. It was a good indicator that we were going in circles, but we were both too timid to ask for help. I cranked the flashlight's battery a bit as we hit dead end after dead end. It wasn't showing any signs of losing power, but the fear of losing our only light source was starting to dawn on me. Are we supposed to go this way? Henry's question broke my train of thought. I followed his pointer finger to the wall with the beam of my flashlight and saw a small gap in the haystacks. Some of the hallways in that maze were pretty cramped, but this was the smallest opening we had come across. So small, in fact, that I had walked right past it. To answer his question, I wasn't sure. The entrance was no bigger than 3 feet tall. Even we would have to get down on all fours to fit through it. And it didn't seem likely that the people who built this thing would expect teenagers to fit through at all. The hole was just small enough to appear unintentional, but just big enough to suggest that it was the way forward. "Can't hurt to try," I said. Henry was a head shorter than me, so he went in first. I squeezed through behind him, holding the flashlight out in front of me. The opening was deceptively deep, stretching far enough to be considered a tunnel on its own. Henry stopped in his tracks halfway through, wary of its unexpected length. "You're sure this is part of it?" Henry called over his shoulder. "Look, there's an opening right there." I pushed him forward. The small tunnel led out in the middle of a standard-sized one. As Henry came out the other side, I heard a muffled laugh and some scampering footsteps above us. Henry stumbled as he tried to get on his feet, falling back into me. I was still crawling out of the shortcut, and he fell right onto my outstretched arm holding the flashlight. Snap! My heart sank as the flashlight was sandwiched between Henry and the dirt. It didn't go out, but when he rolled off of it, I saw that the hand crank used to charge it had completely broken off. I frantically started rooting around in the hay for the handle. "Is everything okay?" Henry asked, his voice shaky. My hand found the little plastic knob. Yeah, everything's okay." I went to pop the crank back into place, only to find that it snapped off in a way that was truly irreparable. The handle left behind a good chunk of plastic in the hole that it had been dislodged from. I tried forcing it back in, but it just popped right back out when I went to turn it. I heard Henry's breath quicken. "It's okay," I assured him. Before now, our age difference had seemed negligible, but all of a sudden, I felt that it was my responsibility to calm his nerves. "Look, I can still turn it like this." I plugged the hole with my finger and started twisting it. There was only about a millimeter of open space left for my finger to latch onto, but it provided just enough leverage for me to rotate the disc like a rotary phone dial. As the mechanism whirred, jagged remnants of the plastic crank dug into my skin. I winced and withdrew my finger, but Henry seemed convinced. I helped Henry back up to his feet. "Come on, we'll be out of here in no time." I couldn't have been more wrong. After going through that opening in the hay, we walked for what felt like an hour. Occasionally we would hit a fork in the road and pick a way forward at random. We tried doubling back to the small tunnel that led us here, but we never came across that opening again. Eventually, the flashlight started to dim. It was a slow fade. By the time I realized what was happening, our visibility had been cut in half. I tried to charge it as much as I could bear to, rotating fingers until all of them were bright red and stinging. There wasn't much use to it. The mechanism ran off of kinetic energy, and I could only get in a few turns at a time before the tips of my fingers would rub raw. We started calling out at any footsteps on the floor above us, but those had become even more infrequent. The slow depreciation of our flashlight went completely unspoken for what seemed like forever. Neither one of us wanted to bring it up. I only know that he saw it too, because the more it dimmed, the more our pace quickened. We were full on sprinting through the maze. At that point, we could barely see more than a foot ahead of us. I made a turn and Henry missed it, running headfirst into a wall of hay. He fell backwards onto his butt. Tears started streaming down his cheeks for the second time that day. "Simon, we're lost," he cried. I know. I could barely choke the words out. Our light was rapidly depleting, like the dying embers of campfire. Henry screamed for his mom. I did the same. I felt sick to my stomach, but too hungry to vomit. My body was aching and out of breath, but the maze was far from done with us. I started cranking the flashlight with my finger as fast as I could. The bulb shot back to life, but I could only push past the pain for a few seconds. As soon as I took my finger out, it immediately started to dim again. The battery was too far gone, and the skin on the tip of my finger was in a nasty state. Henry was hyperventilating, clawing a solid wall of hay and screaming like a maniac. Henry, he didn't even hear me over the sounds of his despair. "Henry!" I grabbed him by the shoulders, letting the flashlight fall at our feet. It illuminated us from below as I pulled him close to address him face to face while I still could. "Henry, the light is going to go out," I finally admitted. He burst into a tirade of shrieking sobs. Snot and tears caked his face. It broke my heart seeing what little faith he had left completely drained from his eyes. A knot sat high in the back of my throat. My mind raced for the right words as his face faded from my view. What would my mom say? "It's going to be dark and it's going to be scary," I said, doing my best to steady my voice. "I know we're lost, but we can still get out." No. Henry, there has to be a way out. And even if we can't find it, it's only a matter of time before everyone comes looking for us. I grabbed his hand, and I stuck it to the wall right next to us. "We'll keep walking, and we'll make it the end no matter what." The luminescent bulb's final glimmer sunk into his eyes. "Henry, will you walk with me?" His pupils disappeared into the dark. "Yes." And with that, the light was completely snuffed out. I'm realizing now that I may not have been descriptive enough earlier. When that flashlight went out, we were cast into a darkness the likes of which I've never known before or since. Every wall and ceiling was packed thick with bales of hay. Even in the middle of the day, not an inkling of sunlight was able to pierce through the layers upon layers of crisscrossing straw. If somebody held their finger an inch away from your open eye, you would have no way of knowing it was there, compounded with the hay's soundproofing quality. We were essentially lost in a labyrinthian sensory deprivation chamber. I let Henry cry it out for a while. When he finally spoke again, I could hear the resolve in his voice. "Okay, let's go." I kept my hand pinned to the wall as I stood up and instructed him to do the same. After a moment to collect ourselves, we set off again. It took a long time for us to adapt to the darkness. Just putting one foot in front of the other was a challenge. Henry kept bumping into me from behind, as we were completely unable to sync up our strides. We walked slow and steady. After walking headfirst into a left turn, I took to keeping my other arm stretched out in front of me. I started calling out turns as we came across them, not wanting to overshoot and risk taken my hand off of the wall. We took lots of breaks. The feeling of pins and needles crept into our outstretched arms frequently. We didn't talk any more than we had to. Outside of calling out turns, I kept my thoughts to myself. My ears rang in the sickening silence. I felt some slight comfort in hearing Henry's feet dragging behind me, though it was entirely outweighed by a dread which grew exponentially with each passing second. We just kept going and going and going. Winding paths forked into more winding paths. We circled dead end after dead end. We weaved our way through countless corners and endless entrails, walking and walking and walking still. And as we walked, things started to change. First, I felt in my feet. The ground beneath us became firm. I thought we had made our way onto some wooden boards. But when I knelt down, I still felt dirt. But the dirt felt different. It felt as if the dry soil was giving way to a more solid material, slowly rising from the earth as we advanced. The walls started to feel different too. Strands of hay began to feel sparse until the bouncy, dry texture was replaced by the smooth, cold feel of cobblestone. Even the air started to feel less stuffy. "Simon, do you feel it?" I didn't have to ask what he meant. "Yeah, let's stop for a second." I plugged my finger back into the flashlight, which I had fastened to my belt loop since it went out. I took a deep breath and started turning. Once again, the plastic bit into my finger. The hallway lit up around us. I was terrified to learn the details of our new surroundings. Somehow, as soon as we could see again, my fears were redirected in a way that I could never have predicted. As light filled the area, the feeling of hay and dirt beneath our feet returned. The walls, the ceiling, it was all hay. The stuffiness and stillness returned, as though the air around us reverted back to that of the haystack maze. Henry looked ghoulish, sweaty and covered in dirt, desperation in his eyes. I'm sure I looked just as bad. I pulled my finger out of the flashlight when it drew blood, and the light started to die once more. As the room around us disappeared from view, the feeling of the cold, stony atmosphere returned. There were no words to be said. I couldn't bring myself to believe the reality of where we were, and I couldn't fathom the possibility of where we might end up. Henry whimpered as we were cast back into unequivocal darkness. "I don't like this," said Henry. "Let's go back." "Back the way we came?" "Yeah." I racked my brain for a better idea. "Okay." We turned on our heels, swapping hands on the wall. I had no faith left in the wall method, but clinging to it was the only way for us to retain some sense of direction. I think we were doing it for comfort more than anything. Henry was now in the lead, taking us back the way we came. I expected the familiar feeling of hay beneath our feet to return as we retraced our steps, but that feeling did not come. If anything, the following hours made it even more clear that no matter which way we went, each step took us further into parts unknown. I heard the sound of our shoes against the hard stone, reverberating more and more as we continued. Our steps accumulated a sizable echo, suggesting that we had ventured into some sort of wide open space the size of Colosseum. I even felt a cold breeze. I stuck my free arm out to the right in an attempt to reach the other side of the tunnel, but it only found open air. I felt numb to the surrealism of the situation. I had abandoned all disbelief hours ago. Even if we had spent a significant amount of time walking in circles, there was no way we wouldn't have stumbled across the exit by now. The texture of the wall and the feel of the room continued to evolve as we walked. The air became thick and dry once more. The stone texture beneath my fingertips began to soften until it felt akin to some sort of crumbling, sedimentary rock. I heard the sound of crackling fire, as if large torches lined the wall above our heads. Yet they cast no light, and we felt no warmth from the invisible flames. Thunk! I grunted as I ran right into Henry, sandwiching him against the wall in front of us. It had been so long since we hit a turn. I guess he had stopped holding a hand out ahead of him. My nose smacked into the back of his head. Stars danced in my eyes. The force almost knocked my hand off the wall, but I managed to keep hold of it. "Shoot," I said, rubbing my nose with my free hand. "Are you okay?" He didn't respond. My heart started pounding ferociously. Henry, are you there?" Why, yes, he squeaked. His voice was barely a whisper. Whatever we had just hit, it had shaken him to his core. What is it? I pleaded. I jumped as I heard a whisper directly in my ear. It was Henry's voice. I hadn't heard him inch closer. His words were barely audible, but they punched me right in the gut. I think it's a door. I stood speechless for an eternity. Are you sure? I whispered. I felt his hand grip my wrist. I instinctively ripped it away from him. Sorry. Go in front of me, he said, still keeping his voice low. I felt him squeeze underneath my armpit to get behind me. I steadied my breath, took a step forward, and stuck out my left hand. It was met with a wall of solid wood. I could feel the coarse, splintery grain as soon as my fingertips hit its surface. Hairs rose on the back of my neck. I slid my hand to a position where I would expect to find a doorknob, and I found one. The metal was warm, an unnerving juxtaposition to the cool air we have been experiencing as of late. I didn't try to turn it. In school, they told us that when a door handle is warm, that means there's a fire on the other side. That was reason enough for me not to open the door, but it wasn't the only one. A foreboding sense of anticipation crept up my spine as soon as my hand felt the knob. I can't explain it, but I could tell that there was someone or something standing right on the other side of that door, waiting for us to open it. I took my hand off the knob. Let's turn back around, I whispered, not want to question or even acknowledge our horrifying discovery. Okay, Henry replied, likely feeling the same. Even now, I have no idea how long we were actually in that maze for. I tried counting as high as I could to pass the time, and I stopped somewhere in the thousands. Hours felt like minutes, but seconds felt like days. Realistically, we had only been without food or water for a handful of hours, but I'm sure that the time we spent running around in a panic had expedited our hunger and dehydration. We took breaks more frequently. Blisters had formed on my heels. My knees felt like they might buckle beneath me at any moment. I began to miss the sweat on my forehead that had stung my eyes while we were in the thick air of the haystacks. I began to wonder if we would walk for days until exhaustion overtook us. I need to go to the bathroom, said Henry. His voice took me by surprise. I figured he had already gone in his pants like I had, but I guess he had been holding it the whole time. Okay, I said, slowing to a stop. I'm gonna go a couple steps ahead. Call me when you're done. I did as I said, sinking down to a crouch with my back against the wall as I heard the sound of his relief. A ping of revelation struck me. I slapped my hand against the cold stone of the ground and heard no echo ring out after. Wherever we were now, the lacking acoustics suggested that tunnel had become narrow again. I heard Henry pull up his zipper, and I walked back towards him. I think we should try to touch the other wall, I said. What? I think the tunnel is small now. We should try to get to the other wall and see if that leads us out. He didn't have to think about it long. The path we were already on hadn't helped. Keep your hand on this one, I said, finding his shoulder again, and stretch out as far as you can. I felt him spread his arms wide, and I followed his left arm out into the middle of the hallway that I hoped we were standing in. We locked hands, and I stretched as far away from the wall as I could, begging for the tip of my middle finger to brush against another wall. But that other wall wasn't there. In my strain to find it, I accidentally pulled Henry too far. Suddenly we were falling to the right, the opposite direction from which we had been leaning. I toppled on top of Henry in the space where the wall had been a split second ago. My palm stuck to cold hard ground, catching me just before my face would have hit it. Henry wasn't so lucky. I heard him groan as the back of his head smacked against a floor hard as granite. Are you okay? I screamed out. He moaned. Did you let go of the wall? I asked, already knowing the answer. Just for a second, he mumbled. I shot to my feet and frantically started shuffling around in the dark, waving my arms out in front of me like a zombie. I didn't feel anything. The wall was gone. Our only tie to the maze had vanished in the thin air the second we let it out of our touch. Tears flowed. I screamed as loud as I could. I screamed for my mom. I screamed for God. Nobody answered. I felt Henry curl up on the ground by my feet. As my voice broke, I collapsed on top of him, molding us into a human heap of misery. We sat there in silence for quite a while, hungry, tired, and completely consumed by the darkness. I have no words to describe the complete and utter hopelessness I felt. Henry laid his head on my lap. I felt his tears soak into the fabric of my jeans. I brushed a comforting hand through Henry's hair, and I felt a warm, sticky substance oozing out the back of his head. My stomach sank through the floor. "Henry." "Yeah," he replied, his voice broken and faint. "Are you sure you're okay?" His grip on me loosened a bit. "Yeah." I let that sit for a moment. "Do you want to keep walking?" I asked. I felt him lightly shake his head. "No," against my lap. "You want to stay here?" He nodded. "Okay, we'll wait for them to come find us." Henry's breathing became labored. I sat and stroked his hair and closed my eyes. This is where we would die. I was sure of it. After everything that we had been through, it didn't seem that bad. We had slipped into a crack between worlds, lost in a boundless, incomprehensible void, betrayed by our reality, forgotten by our God. There was nothing left to do but sit and cry and wait. And then, out of the dark, we heard him. At first, he was just a pair of creeping footsteps in the distance. They appeared so subtly that I didn't even process them until they were almost upon us. I thought they were a trick of my imagination, but sure enough, a deep, booming voice soon rang out to accompany them. "You boys lost." The sound of another voice was so unnatural to me. Maybe it was the hunger or the exhaustion, or the pure emotional turmoil. But I swear the voice sounded exactly like my father's. "Dad!" Henry called out from my lap. A low chuckle split the air. "No, I'm not your father," the shadow man cooed. "I'm just a friend." As he inched closer, I heard that our visitor was not alone. His footsteps were joined by those of a four-legged animal. Claw tips clacking against the hard floor suggested it was some sort of large dog. Suddenly, his animalistic companion bounded towards us. I braced myself and pulled Henry close to my chest as I felt the cold, wet prodding of a large snout against our bodies. Sniffing and snorting like that of a basset hound filled the air. I could hear a large metal chain dangling from his neck, the other end no doubt held by the mysterious man. "You boys seem mighty lost," he said. On the surface, he sounded concerned, but the more he talked and the closer he got to us, I sensed a jovial undercurrent in his words, like someone trying their best to suppress a smile. "Can you get us out of here?" Henry pleaded. "Of course I can," said the man. He was now standing right in front of us. "I came here to collect you." I heard the basset hound go off towards a spot where Henry had relieved himself earlier. It sniffed around a bit before returning to us. I heard the chain settle as it sat at its master's heel. "How can you see us?" I asked, my voice raspy. "Do you have a flashlight?" "Don't need one," the man said, a slight twinge of annoyance in his voice. "I've done my fair share of route around in the dark. Guess my eyes have adjusted to it." I tried to visualize what he might look like. I did my best to keep the nondescript shape of a man's face in my mind as he spoke, but the dancing fuzz of my vision kept contorting his features into something unnatural. I heard a shuffling, and the proximity of the man's voice when he next spoke suggested that he had knelt down to address us. "You're in a rough shape," the shadow man sighed. "Please get us out of here," Henry moaned, barely audible. "Well," said the man, "I sure would like to, but I can only take one of you at a time." I couldn't believe my ears. "What do you mean?" I pressed. "Why can't you take both of us with you? This boy is far too hurt. Trying to manage both of you at once would just slow us down," the man said, his voice rife with false emotional strain. "Wish there was another way, but that's just how it is." "What are you talking about?" I growled. "I'll walk right behind you." I said no. He boomed. His baritone shook my body so hard that my teeth clattered. "One child at a time, that's the rule," he growled. He sounded exasperated at the notion, as if the rule were not of his own design. My gut told me not to follow this man anywhere, but the thought of being separated from Henry petrified me. The man let out another deep sigh. "Don't you worry. As long as you stay right where you are, I'll be able to get you just fine. What do you say, son?" I was scared and confused and filled with a million questions. but far too weak to protest further. Despite my complete lack of sight, I felt the unmistakable aura of an outstretched hand in front of me. I went to meet it, and upon feeling the leathery flesh of his palm, an icy jolt of terror shot through my veins. I had been trying as hard as I could to keep the basic image of a human man's face in my mind. But in that moment, the dancing specks behind my eyes insisted on warping those features into something horrifying. I tried so hard not to imagine him as a towering, slender figure with spindly arms that stretched multiple yards long. So long that he had to fold them over thrice like the crooked legs of an exotic bird just to offer his hand to me this close in proximity. I tried not to imagine a robust pot belly jutting out of his otherwise slender frame, covered in thick black fur and hanging low over his legs, which were just as long as his arms and folded up like an accordion. I tried not to imagine his face as a gaunt, eyeless visage with dark, rugged skin stretched tight around an impossibly wide grin. I tried not to imagine a pair of ivory horns atop his head that spiraled several feet up toward the heavens. I tried and tried and tried to keep that ghastly depiction out of my head. But for as long as he held my hand in his, it persisted in my mind's eye as if it were an unquestionable truth. I withdrew my hand from his grasp, awestruck with a terror that I cannot possibly describe. I pulled Henry as close as I humanly could, and I whispered directly into his ear, "Henry, I don't think we should go with him. I think we should stay here." The man definitely heard me, but he didn't react. He remained crouched in front of us, skeletal fingers held out in offer. "I want my mom," Henry whispered. He felt limp, like a rag doll in my arms. "Please, son, I reckon he ain't got much time left," taunted the shadow man. I had no tears left to cry. Henry was dying in my arms. Whatever might happen to him should I let him go, he wouldn't last much longer here. I loosened my grip as I felt Henry's arm leave my lap. I whimpered and felt him being tugged away. "Don't worry," the man sneered. "I'll carry you." I heard the hound pull at its chain and set off into the dark. The footsteps of the man followed behind it. "You stay put." I heard him call over his shoulder, "I'll come back for you later." I curled up in a ball as the footsteps became increasingly faint. My mind raced with the possible outcomes of my decision. What awaited Henry in the arms of the shadow man? Did he really intend to help? Or had Henry just met a terrible fate? My thoughts were bombarded with untold horrors that might be in store. I imagined Henry's blood-curdling screams at the hands of the conniving specter. I could sense his suffering. I could hear his torment. I could feel his blood on my hands. I don't know what possessed me to finally get back on my feet. Maybe it was pure adrenaline or my fear of the shadow man. But the newfound isolation was a big enough push for my survival instincts to fully kick in. I was struck with a sudden, intense realization that I had to get myself out of that maze, whatever the cost. I shot up so fast I nearly keeled over. I fumbled around for the carabiner latched onto my belt loop and freed the flashlight from its clasp. I took a deep breath and shoved the mangled tip of my pointer finger back into the hole. It was time for a Hail Mary. I gritted my teeth and began to spin the dial like my life depended on it. Needles of pain shot my arm as I fed the mechanism of my suffering. Every second the plastic shards dug into my skin felt like a hot lick of hellfire. But I viciously worked it round and round until the room began to illuminate. Once again the sight of the hay walls and the dirt floor began to creep into view. But that wasn't all this time. As the light brought me out of that dark, endless void, I began to hear muffled voices and footsteps all around me for the first time in days. They were looking for me. They were looking for us. A wave of relief crashed over me, but it stole my mind from the task at hand. My cranking had slowed, and the light began to dim again. As it faded, so did the sounds of my salvation. I was slipping away back into the dark. I took off running. The promise of rescue reinvigorated my work on the flashlight. I winced as it shredded my skin, alternating fingers, until each one was coated by the steady drip of fresh blood. I cried out as much as I could, my voice raspy from overuse and dehydration. I ducked and weaved, desperate to make contact with someone, lest I fall back into the darkness. I turned a corner, and finally, I was met with the glow of another flashlight. I dropped to my knees, letting the bloody hunk of plastic clatter to the ground. Beams of light bounced toward me, accompanied by the worried cries of my rescuers. The next thing I remember was waking up in the arms of a stranger. Daylight scorched my retinas as a teenager carried me out of the maze. It seemed impossible for the sun to still be up, but time spent was the farthest thing from my mind. Through a blur of tears, I saw my mother frantically screaming at a bunch of farmhands. My sister shrank behind her, face snow white with guilt. A crowd of people was forming around them. Whoever found me hadn't been searching for long. I barely remember anything that happened once I was out of the maze. I remember being delivered into my mother's arms. I remember how tightly she held me while I told the firefighters about everything that had happened in the maze. I remember my sister crying profusely. I remember waiting there past sunset, while a team of first responders and farmers dismantled a haystack, maze bale by bale. I remember Henry's mom pacing back and forth as the layers were slowly peeled away. I remember her screaming and bawling and slamming her fists in the dirt when they removed the last stack, and Henry was nowhere to be found. I remember all of that now, but to be honest, I didn't remember anything that I've written here until just a few months ago. Back in July, a couple of Zoe's friends and I staged an intervention about her drinking. She never made it past high school, and by the time I got home from my first year of college this spring, she had a reputation around town for being a total barfly. I think her friends were worried about her getting worse when I went back in the fall, but I wasn't sure why. We'd barely spoken for years. She lashed out at me as soon as she saw the circle of chairs in her living room. She claimed that I was the reason she couldn't keep her face out of bottle, and wept about how a little boy went missing because of her carelessness. At first, I had no idea what she was talking about, but the more she spilled about everything from that day, the more those memories poured back into my head. The stone hallways, the wooden door, the man who took Henry, everything. Even as I write this, new memories from my time in a haystack float to the surface. I feel adrift in a river of recollection, grasping out at small islands of information as they pass. Whenever I manage to latch onto one and start digging, I uncover the same system of roots, connecting them all below the murky depths. I don't dare ask my mom about that day, but I've done my research. No matter what actually happened in that maze, a little boy named Henry went in and never came out. The local papers all say that he was led away by a strange man who took him off the farm. Nobody saw the two of them leave. Nobody knew what the man looked like. But I know, try as I might, I still can't shake the sight of him from my mind. I can't escape the familiar sound of his voice. When I'm left alone with my thoughts, my ears replay his parting words to me like a broken record. My fear of the dark had already followed me into adulthood, but since remembering all of this, it is amplified immensely. I haven't slept much these past few months. Even when I crash from exhaustion, I always do so with the lights on. I've avoided going anywhere after sunset, and I never let my phone battery dip. I haven't gone to the movies, or anywhere that would put me at risk of finding myself in total darkness. I'm not sure why I chose to share my story here. Maybe seeing all the Halloween decorations going up around town stirred some guilt. I don't want any kid out there to go through what I did, and I definitely don't want anyone else to end up like Henry. Part of me thinks Henry is still out there. I don't know if that would be a good thing or a bad thing. Maybe I'll try go back someday, shut myself in my closet with the lights off, and try to find him. For now, sharing my story is all I can stomach to do, because I know that even if Henry is somehow still alive, he won't be alone. I'll come back for you later. Out there, in the dark, I know he waits for me still. Story 6. I jumped off a roof but didn't hit the ground. I remember how cold it was that night. I wished I had brought a thicker jacket, then realized how silly that was. Temperature was one of the few things I could still feel. Love, joy, anger, desire, interest, they'd all gradually faded away. I chose a building in an empty part of the city. I didn't want a group of people gathered around my body. I wanted someone to stumble across me, then call someone to pick me up, Leave the way I always wanted to live, as the least amount of burden as I could. The building was 30 stories tall. I researched that 5 stories were high enough to kill someone, but I wanted to be sure. My grandpa always told me this part of town was once bustling. It used to be home to hundreds of businesses, many schools, and several of the city's most stunning parks. Ever since I've been alive, though, it has been known as the Wasteland. 20 blocks of abandoned buildings and cracked roads that the city stopped caring about a long time ago. I took a deep breath as I stared out. I saw the bright city skyline that seemed so far from this place. I looked down the thin sidewalk below, wondering how long it would take for someone to find me. I thought about my mom, my only friend, Millie, and my cat, Winston. I knew they'd be fine without me, better even. I closed my eyes and jumped. As soon as I stepped off, I realized I'd made a mistake. Everything that worried me seemed so menial, and I couldn't believe I'd made such a stupid choice. My parents would be ruined. My cat would wonder where I was. Millie would be alone to deal with all the bullshit high school stuff that seemed to matter so much 1 second ago. But there was no turning back. It felt like hitting concrete, but that's not what happened. I opened my eyes and saw the sidewalk below. It was still so far down. I looked up and could see the spot where I jumped, only a few yards above me. I wondered if I'd landed on a fire escape. I looked directly under my body, but saw nothing holding me in the air. To my side, the building sat a few feet away, just out of reach. I racked my brain for an explanation as to what was happening. A wind force that was holding me in place in the air? No, it felt like I was on something stiff, as if an invisible box was holding most of my body in place. I could still move my arms and head, though. Had I died, and this was a weird afterlife, I didn't rule it out, but my body still felt alive. And I never believed in that sort of thing. I was banking on there being nothing after I died. For the next few hours, I hung there in the air, hoping someone would walk by and notice the floating body. I tried grasping the side of the building, but my fingers wouldn't reach. I dropped my head and noticed a light turn on a few floors below. Hey! I screamed. No one came to the window, so I screamed again. Still no response. I took a deep breath and screamed as loudly as I could. Please! I need help. A few seconds went by, and the light turned off. Hey! I cried. I called several more times, but the light never came back on. Hours passed. The streetlights below turned off as the sun started to rise. I'd spent the first of many nights in the sky. Day 3. My stomach clenched with hunger, and my mouth was dry with thirst. There was no question that I was still alive. This also presented the issue of having to use the bathroom. I couldn't pull my pants down far enough due to the inability to twist my lower body. I held my piss for as long as I could, but had already gone twice in my pants and was trying to avoid a third time. Tears filled my eyes as I pissed myself, turning me into some kind of fucked up cloud. I wished I could go back to 2 nights ago, stop myself from writing that letter, from getting on that bus, from breaking into this ugly building and climbing the 30 stories to the roof. My legs still ached from the climb. I looked down and noticed someone staring up at me. At least, it looked like they were. I didn't know how long they'd been staring, but it didn't matter. I waved frantically and yelled into the air, despite knowing they wouldn't be able to hear me. They continued to stare for several minutes. I could tell it was a man, but couldn't see any distinguishing features. He stood still, like he was made from stone, as I continued desperately to call for help. His demeanor made me more uncomfortable than I already was. I finally gave up after what felt like an hour. He stared the whole time, standing completely still. When I stopped, he looked away, then continued down the sidewalk. Day 7. It rained a few days ago, and I was able to catch some in my mouth. The way my body craved food and water, there was little doubt that I was still alive, if barely. I was so fucking hungry. It went beyond craving the taste of food. I could feel my body eating itself. I tried catching bugs out of the air and caught a few flies and gnats here and there, but I knew it wasn't enough to keep me alive. The parts of my skin exposed to the sun were dry and as red as a fresh tomato. On the exposed space between my pants and shoes, My skin had grown large, yellow blisters that felt like tiny balls of fire. I resigned to the fact that no one could see me. Every time someone approached, I'd use what little spit I had left and let it fall from my mouth to the ground below. I missed most of the time, but there were at least 3 times my spit landed right in front of the person, and one guy, I'm pretty sure I nailed on the head. None of them even slowed down. One man stopped and looked up. I excitedly waved my arms, but he continued on, not reacting to my pleas for help. Maybe this was all some fucked up dream, and I'd wake up in my bed with Winston on my chest. I closed my eyes, hoping I was right. A sound woke me. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. Even my eyes were tired, and they strained to look from place to place. They focused on a window several stories down with a blurry figure hanging outside. I wondered if it was a window with a light on the other night. I could tell the figure was a man, but my vision was blurry. As my eyes began to focus, I noticed something wrong with the way the man looked. He looked almost like your average balding man in his late 40s to early 50s, but his features were too close together. He had dark irises, like he'd been doing a lot of drugs, and wore a smile that showed all his teeth. His teeth were larger than any person's I'd ever seen. I wondered if they were fake. Hell, help, I said weakly. The man started to shake, like he had some neurological disorder. A sound came from him that I couldn't figure out at first, but quickly realized he was laughing. It was a soft giggle like a cartoon might do after playing a prank. I said, I need help. I said, as loud as I could, which was a little louder than a normal whisper. He continued to laugh. I dropped my head, resigned to the fact that this man was some horrible figment of my imagination. He went silent, so I looked back at him. He wore a smile, but was standing perfectly still. I watched him for several seconds, and was about to say something when he opened his mouth. You have to eat, he said in a high-pitched voice, like he was trying to mimic a woman's voice. Well, what? I replied. He didn't say anything for several minutes, and I was unable to take my eyes off him. You will eat, he said before disappearing back into the window. Day 18. I shouldn't still be alive, I thought. However, my body continued to react as one normally would in my condition. My skin was on fire due to the constant sun exposure. Peeling skin and blisters were more prevalent than normal skin on the exposed parts of my body. On some days, it felt like the heat from the sun might cook me like a rotisserie chicken. I smelled horrible, both from days without showering and the collection of waste inside my pants. Every time I caught a whiff, I gagged, but of course, I had nothing to vomit. Luckily, without hardly anything to eat or drink, I hadn't used a bathroom in almost a week. I guess I should be weirdly thankful for the smell, as it attracted flies I could routinely catch and eat, but it wasn't enough to satisfy my continuously growing hunger. It was a hunger I can't describe. I'd moved past craving meals I normally ate and was craving meat in general, like my body knew I was in desperate need of protein. Day 31. My head hung to the ground. I no longer had the strength to lift it to look around, and didn't see the point in it. Really, this is where I was going to die if I could die. My hunger went from a pain in my stomach to a primal surge through me to consume anything I could. The bugs learned to stop coming around me. They stayed just out of reach on my lower half. It hasn't rained in almost a week. My lips were so chapped that every time I opened my mouth, I could feel flakes of skin peeling away. It was the same for the dry spots on my skin. I heard a familiar sound that made my eyes widen, despite barely having the strength to do so. It was the man laughing. He was only a few floors below, hanging from a window. He cackled like a hyena while staring up at me with pale eyes. Fuck you, I said, the inside of my throat sore and swollen. You're not real. He stopped laughing, but left his mouth hanging open, frozen in place. He remained still as a statue for several seconds. My heartbeat increased as I waited for him to move, to speak, to do anything. His mouth closed slowly, and his eyes pointed at me without moving his head. You have to eat, he said in a low, gravely voice as if he'd been gargling with rocks. He slunk back into the window, but I never saw him leave the building. I stared in a daze at the window for hours, waiting for him to come back. He made it sound like there was something I could eat. My clothes? They were the only things I could grab. I reached toward my shirt and noticed a dry, cracked skin on my fingers. They looked almost as though they'd been fried in oil. Day 43. I remembered seeing on a TV show that humans can survive around a month without food, granted they have access to water. Without water, a human can only survive about a week. I'd surpassed that in spades. I couldn't believe my body was still pumping blood through my veins, still filling my lungs with air. I wanted to be dead, but not for the same reasons I was on the roof in the first place. My clothes draped over my body, and my skin was tight against my bones. My tits were hardly there before, but were almost completely gone. The smell coming from my pants would have made me sick if I had anything in my stomach to throw up. I'd been chewing on my shirt, but it did nothing to stop the pain in my stomach. I craved every food I'd ever had, even the ones I hated. Brussels sprouts, cherry tomatoes, Grandma's vegetable casserole. But what I craved more than anything was meat. My body knew I needed protein more than anything else, and the thought consumed me. Every person who passed by looked like a potential meal. I lost myself every time I saw someone, scratching and clawing to try and reach them. My fingernails started to peel, coming off like a Band-Aid that had been there for too long. I finished peeling it and stared at the nail. I didn't think long before putting it in my mouth and chewing. The nail danced in my mouth, not giving way to the weak state of my teeth. A piece eventually snapped off, breaking it in two. I swallowed. I dropped my head in shame, but the feeling of having something go down my throat and into my stomach was something I never thought I'd miss so much. I paused before moving to my next fingernail. Then another and another. It took me almost all day to finish my nails. I looked over and noticed the spot between the bricks I'd been staring at had moved. It was a little higher. I was falling. Day 44. After the fingernails, I thought about what else I could eat. The only parts of me I could reach were my arms and hands. I wasn't sure my teeth were strong enough to tear through the flesh, and I wasn't sure I could take the pain. I pulled a few strands of hair from my head and swallowed. They tickled my throat while traveling down. I waited for a moment, but I didn't appear to have moved. Fuck, I said to myself. I pulled out several more strands of hair. Cringing with each one, I threw them into my mouth like a handful of noodles and swallowed. Still, nothing. Fuck. I cried, anger filling my veins. I grabbed a fistful of my hair and pulled. I felt the root of every strand break from my skin. I held the hair in front of me, seeing drops of blood decorating a few of the strands. I stuffed all the hair in my mouth. The clump got stuck in the back of my throat, making me realize a mistake I'd made. I reached into my mouth and pulled out the clump, swallowing it in small chunks instead. I put the last bit in my mouth. It went down slowly and scratched the edges of my throat. It stuck in the middle of my throat, and I wanted to come back up. I closed my eyes and swallowed, forcing it the rest of the way down. I opened my eyes and saw I was a floor lower. I smiled and took a break to allow the pain in my scalp to settle before grabbing another chunk. Day 50. Most of my hair was gone, as was the flesh on top of my right hand. It hurt like hell, and I was pretty sure an infection had started around the teeth marks. However, I made it to the 15th floor. I told you would eat, he said. He was hanging outside the window beside me, smiling his wide smile. Why are you doing this to me? I asked. I'm not, he said with a giggle. Who is? I asked. And don't say it's me and this is some fucked lesson from God. Oh no, he said. Not you at all. He paused before looking up toward the roof, then down at the sidewalk. This place was once owned by horrible men, he said with a laugh. Horrible men who did horrible things to men, women, children, animals. He paused. And like nicotine from cigarettes, the evil, it stained the walls, absorbed into them. I lowered my head, trying to comprehend what the man was saying. I had so many questions, but the only one that came out was, why me? You offended it, he said, his smile growing wider. So now you have to appease it. Day 61. My fingers were gone. My lips were barely there. I was only on the 10th story. I'd been staring at the building. Since hearing the strange man's explanation, I could feel something off about the building. There was an essence coming from it. Something wrong. But what did it matter? Whatever this thing was, it wanted me to eat myself completely. It's enough. I screamed. I can't keep going. I knew what it must want. It wanted me to eat my eyes, my nose, all the skin and musculature from my arms and chest. The strange man poked his head out of the closest window. I dropped my head in exhaustion. You have to keep eating, he said. Fuck you, I returned. It was the first time I saw the man stop smiling. He looked like a child about to cry. He stayed for a few more seconds, then slid back inside. Day 67. I did what I said I would. I stopped eating anything from my body, despite the cravings for protein. I didn't care how long it took. I was going to let myself waste away. Eventually, my skin had to rot and get taken away by flies, birds would take my organs, and my bones would waste away. I dropped my head, hoping I could pass out for a little while. I heard a familiar voice, but it wasn't the strange man. I looked up and saw my mom leaning over the side of the building. My heart jumped, and my eyes opened wider than they ever had. She leaned back, and I saw another figure. It was a police officer. I tried to hear what they were saying, but could only catch a word here and there. CCTV, the officer said. Jumped, body missing. The only thing I heard from my mom was sobs. I'd never heard her cry like that. Even after my grandma died, there was a pain in her cries that made me feel worse for her than I did for myself. My mom was there for a long time, even with the officer trying to get her to move. She kept looking in my direction as if she saw me, but I kept disappearing. If I thought there was any chance she heard me, I would have screamed, "I love you, and I'm sorry." I saw the officer pull her away, leaving me alone again. I stared at the side of the building, looking at the cracks and water stains, all the bird shit and missing paint. I was sick of looking at it, and angry that I had to. Fuck you, you haunted bitch. I screamed with all my weak throat would allow. I never did anything to anyone. I offended you? By what? Feeling lonely and sad. I said weakly, fuck you, I'm not eating anymore. It rained that night, so I was able to drink. It felt nice to have something in my belly besides flies, and the lingering pieces of my body. I almost vomited from being unable to stop myself from drinking, but I managed to keep it down. I was about to fall asleep when I heard something cut through the sound of the rain. It was a voice, my mom's voice. "Kara," she cried. I raised my head and saw her hanging out the window right beside me. She was looking right at me. "Mom!" I cried. "You can see me?" "You keep going in and out," she yelled. "Kara, what's going on?" I wanted to tell her everything I'd been through over the last few months. Mostly, I wanted to tell her how sorry I was. I reached my arm towards her, and she did the same. I was still a bit too high. I looked at the pale flesh of my bicep and sighed. I took a bite. My mom screamed as I pulled a chunk of meat away with my teeth. It was chewy, and I was barely able to stay awake through the pain. I chewed and swallowed, allowing me to drop a few inches. My mom grabbed my hand and pulled. I felt the air dislodge around my body. I hit the edge of the building hard and thought my shoulder had dislocated. My mom strained to pull me into the window, but didn't stop trying. She pulled and pulled until I finally fell through the window on the floor beside her. In under a second, she had me wrapped in her arms. I thought she'd be disgusted by the way I looked, that she would push me away after she smelled me, but she refused to let me go. For several moments, we sat there. It didn't feel real, just like when I jumped and didn't hit the ground. A slight shake in the floor brought me back to reality. I looked around and noticed all the dark stains on the walls. Some were from water and mold, but others were almost black and splattered violently. I felt a buzz over my entire body. "Let's go, Mom," I said. I tried to stand, but my legs shook before quickly giving in. I almost fell, but my mom caught me. She draped me over her shoulder, and I tried to move with her, but my feet refused to find footing. It began to feel impossible to leave the confines of the building without some extra help. But before I mention it, my mom grabbed my arms and pulled my body onto her back. She moved her thin legs slowly towards the door. We entered the hallway, and she picked up speed. It was amazing as she was only a bit bigger than me. I began to believe that myth about mothers having superhuman strength when their kids were in trouble had some truth to it. A low, loud groan came from the walls as the ceiling dropped small pieces of debris on us. The building was angry, and I worried it would refuse to let us leave. My mom didn't stop, though, even after we entered the stairwell, and she had to carry me down the steep stairs. The building shook again, almost sending me and my mom falling to the bottom of the stair set, but she managed to regain her footing without dropping me. My feet dragged along the floor as we continued down one stair set, then another, all while the building continuously shook, growing more and more violent with every passing minute. By the time we reached the bottom floor, the buzz in my body felt like thousands of hornets under my skin trying to break free. I pulled my hands from my mom's to cover my ears, as if doing so would help. I fell to the floor and pressed my hands against my ears. It felt like someone was going at my skull with a drill. The low, loud groan continued to bellow as tears filled my eyes. I realized the building wasn't going to let me leave. If I tried to step outside, it would kill me. I'd never see my family or friends again. The thought made me scream, but it was drowned out by the droning groan from the building. My body started to move, and I saw it was my mom dragging me to the door. She had tears in her eyes as she strained to get me to the door. "Stop," I cried. "It's going to kill me." But she wouldn't, and I didn't have the strength to fight her. I closed my eyes as the buzzing continued, and the groaning grew louder and louder. My vision went black, and everything became silent. I felt rain hit my face and opened my eyes. I was on the sidewalk outside the building, staring into the sky. My mom put her arms around me and held me tightly. I heard her crying, but continued staring at the sky, specifically at the spot where I'd spent the last 2 months. It looked so far away. When I finally dropped my eyes, I saw the strange man standing in the lobby. He was waving at me, waving for me to come back in. But as my mom held me in place, I didn't even consider it. Story 7. I didn't go missing. I'm hiding. I want to start this off by saying I'm sorry. I didn't warn you. Anyone else, either. To be honest, it never even crossed my mind. I was too focused on getting away. To my parents, my friends, my colleagues, my dog, and most of all, to you, I'm sorry. It all started about a year ago. Maybe a bit longer. I can't remember. These days, it seems like I'm forgetting everything. That's no surprise to me. That was the first day that those things were on the news. It was like an apocalyptic horror movie brought to life. Giant, misformed creatures, like a mixture between a werewolf and a shadow. They had blood-red eyes and faded into the night. You could spot their eyes from 100 meters away. And if you saw them, they saw you. And the smallest bite, the smallest scratch, and your transformation would begin. These things were multiplying and fast. They couldn't be combated. It took 6 days for alerts to reach the furthest corners of the planet, and 12 days for a global military treaty to commence. And it wasn't enough. These things weren't humans. Bullets would bounce off their skin like steel. The army served as mothing, but giant stacks of feed. In the next 3 days, estimated numbers went from 1,000 globally to more than 30,000. It seemed hopeless. The entire human race put together couldn't stop these things. They were called demons by civilians, and a good number had abandoned their homes to live in more secluded areas. It seemed hopeless until we caught a glimpse of them in the sun. Previously, they would run away whenever sunrise was approaching, the only time they retreated. It was believed that the armies were doing some sort of damage to them, which is why funds continued, rather than mass evacuation. But the distorted echoes of agony, as tons of shadowy flesh melted into pools of dark blood, was enough to make even the strongest soldiers break down. The sounds, they later admitted, would never be forgotten. This was the key solution. Sunlight, UV light. Once word spread out about this. Armies began putting together giant beams of ultraviolet light, tens of millions of lumens. Pure devastation. The creatures would melt in agony from the light. Even in the dead of night, this was the way. It took 9 days. 9 days for creatures to evolve from this. 9 days for them to build immunity to light. 5 more days for their numbers to go back to how it was. This was the last shot, and it failed. Governments broke down. People fled, and the creatures reproduced. Mass evacuation was implemented. The entire continents of Europe, Asia, and Africa were infested. In 4 weeks, 2.7 billion people were evacuated. The only time in history. For the remaining people, there was no way left for them. That was 1 year ago. Humans went to war with those creatures and lost. But we were together after a few months. It felt like life was relatively normal. In the night, out of the corner of your eye, you'd swear you saw something. Or you'd hear a leaf crunch out of nowhere. But there was never anything there. 1 entire year and 0 sightings of those creatures. At the start, the governments put in strict safety measures to prevent any of those creatures from popping back up. But now, nothing. It had been months since there was any effort. But I knew. Lots knew. In fact, everyone knew. If those things reappeared, there was nowhere else to go. It's been 13 months. I remember now. 13 months since the first sighting. I never stopped to think. Despite all the sheer numbers, despite how many times appeared on the news, forced to us, those who got transformed, how did they feel? Did it hurt? Was it scary? Was it painless? Blissful even? I'd laugh. But I don't think I'm able to anymore. Really, there was just one thing I never thought about. How slow the transformation was. I went into hiding 1 week ago, after the first sign appeared. Right now, half my body is already transformed. I'm doing the bare minimum to survive. I know I can't. I know I shouldn't. But I'm scared to die. No one can find me here. I made sure to erase any trace of my leaving. Everyone will think I've gone missing. I'll be long gone before anyone finds this note. I hope one day this reaches you. I can see the ocean. So vast, endless, it seems. To my parents, to my friends, to my colleagues, to my dog, and most of all, to you. I'm sorry that I couldn't say goodbye. Story 8. I went camping with my friends. We found something that shouldn't be there by any means. Well, this is officially the worst zoo ever, announced Cynthia as we passed an enclosure with a lonely monkey swinging back and forth between 2 branches. I don't even remember who suggested stopping at the little roadside zoo after we saw the rusty sign by the highway, but we were all here, spending the first day of our supposed camping trip, looking at depressed animals. Our friend group consisted of 5 people. Cynthia and her boyfriend Greg, our mutual friend Christine, my girlfriend Julie, and I. The trip was supposed to be a late celebration of completing our finals, but it was seemingly doomed from the start. The zoo was a sad excuse of one. Before the monkey, we saw a lion lie on the concrete beside a wall of his cage, a slim bear walking in circles, some zebras standing lethargically in the mud, an aviary that had parrots with some plucked feathers, screaming at anyone who walked by, and a supposed reptile house which had an iguana with broken spikes and a terrarium that seemed too small for the thing to even turn around comfortably, a snake curled up in a corner, and the ugliest looking frog I've ever seen in my life, poking, its eyes out from the water, in an otherwise empty aquarium. Maybe this will help, pointed Greg at a sign. Dinosaur Kingdom, Giants of a Lost World. Yeah, it'll be epic. I groaned. I mean, it can't be much worse than the previous stuff. I guess. We entered the area, walking through a gate which was obviously a Jurassic Park ripoff, and were immediately greeted by a surprisingly well-made sculpture, positioned to look like it is running to the woods to get us. Allosaurus. This fierce predator lived in the Jurassic era. It was known for preying upon creatures much bigger than itself, by ripping chunks out of them, using its strong neck muscles. Greg read the sign planted at the feet of the Allosaurus. What a cool guy. Hey, I think he's kind of cute. Julie punched my arm playfully. Yeah, especially if he was alive. Those knife-sized teeth would be real adorable. Okay, smartass, then check out this one. Julie pulled me towards the next statue. This isn't even a dinosaur, but I'll admit he's cute. I looked at the derpy-looking giant plastic frog. Beelzebufo, the largest frog ever. Cool. Other than this, the section ended up having a wonky triceratops, a stegosaurus with broken plates, a T-Rex, one of those flying things, and a mammoth for some reason. We exited the zoo after looking at the Allosaurus one last time, while leaving the dinosaur kingdom. It was really in a good shape compared to the other statues with peeling paint and broken parts. They probably installed it later, said Cynthia. Maybe, answered Greg. The entrance of the zoo soon grew smaller and smaller in the mirror of my ancient Suzuki. The next hours went by slowly as our car joined the others on the highway. Every people in their own miniature universe, forming a never-ending line of vehicles, all going one direction, like some strange fish school in a gray sea, surrounded by green and the yellows of fall creeping in. We spoke about meaningless things. Julie, ever so worrying, asked me for the 50th time if I packed the tents. Later, Greg followed up, wanting to know if anyone bought coffee. Babe, you know I have some energy drinks. Cynthia snuggled him in the back seat. Yeah, and you know I hate those. Well, more for me, teased the one playfully. Sometime after we spoke about our exams, and then I started a rather boring game of our kakba. But at last, our exit came, an open mouth of the forest, and I drove right in, leaving the school cars. Soon, we were bouncing around in our seats along dirt roads, while the engine roared like a dying dragon. That poor old car clearly wasn't built for this. Okay, you can stop. This is a spot. I recognize it. Greg tapped my shoulder as we were driving by a small clearing. So, you're sure there won't be anyone around? No rangers telling us to fuck off? No kids yelling 6 in the morning? No teens sneaking around at night, trying to find a quiet spot? Yeah, you pretty much summarized it perfectly. And how do you know this spot exactly? Asked Julie. Uncle Tom showed me. Isn't he the conspiracy theorist who was in jail once? Were you coming to search for Bigfoot or what? Greg blushed like a tomato, then a really quiet yes left his mouth. But I was like 6, and I can't deny we heard a really strange roar or something. Yeah, Uncle Tommy probably ate too much beans for lunch. I added, and everyone burst out laughing. Okay, you got a point, but still, it's a good spot for camping, said Greg after the last chuckle stopped. Well, I suppose Bigfoot tearing us apart is still better than moaning teens beside the tent at 1 a.m., said Cynthia as she pulled out her backpack from the trunk. We unpacked and set up our tents by the end of the clearing under the first trees. By the time we finished, the sun was setting, bleeding orange stripes on the grass. After the tents were set, we immediately went to sleep. The car ride was more tiring than it should have been. Right before I fell asleep, a deep, bellowing sound echoed from outside. We looked at each other with Julie, and then I yelled, "Very funny, Greg." There was no answer. Morning came with chirping birds and golden sun rays that were slowly but noticeably grew weaker by the day. Our breath formed small clouds, disappearing nearly instantly, but still there. "Fall's sure coming early this year," said Julie, while she snuggled me in her sweater. "Yeah, but this is the best hiking weather. Still warm enough during the day, but not too hot," I said as I snuggled her back. Greg and Cynthia did the same on the other side of our campfire. After we finished breakfast and warmed up, we packed our backpacks and followed Greg into the forest on a trail, which seemed more like an animal track than a proper hiking trail. Most of the morning was normal. The landscape seemed untouched and had a wild beauty. Trees towered above us. Dark green moss covered their bark like an old jacket. Small, unnamed creeks ran through the woods, their splashing mixed with the chirping birds above. Squirrels were jumping around between the branches like tiny acrobats. A deer disappeared into the forest, startled by our footsteps. But at some point, everything started changing slowly. The birds went silent for longer and longer periods of time. The squirrels retreated into the top of their trees. A sunbathing lizard scurried under the leaf litter on the ground, without any warning signs. Sometime later, Cynthia stopped. "Don't you guys feel like we're getting watched?" she whispered. Julie and I exchanged looks. We didn't speak about it, but I sensed her getting more and more nervous, and I felt the same. But before we could answer, Greg let out an annoyed laugh. "Told you not to drink the second can of Monster." "For the love of God, Greg, they are energy drinks, not fucking drugs. I'm not going to hallucinate because of caffeine." Nithya burst out. "Don't be hard on her." "I feel it too," said Julie silently. "Yeah, me too," I said. "Fine. Sorry, but I didn't notice anything." Greg closed the subject, but the anxious sparks in his eyes told otherwise. Maybe he didn't want to sound paranoid after the Bigfoot fiasco of the previous day. At that point, we left it at that, but we walked closer to each other after that. At some point in the afternoon, Julie grabbed my arm. "Can we turn back?" The forest was silent for hours, and on rare occasions, it sounded like branches were breaking around us. "Yeah." I grabbed her shoulder. "Guys, I don't know about you, but we're turning back." I said, "What?" "But we're minutes away from one of the best spots." Greg stopped in his tracks. "Sorry, but I don't care. This place is creeping me out. I don't know what is here, but I'm starting to think your Uncle Tommy wasn't as much a lunatic as I thought. What do you think, babe?" Turned Greg toward Cynthia. "We're turning back as well. Now," she said, looking him deep in the eye. Greg let out a long sigh. Fian, the silent trees watched as we turned back the way we came. For hours, we walked in nearly complete silence. Then, the clicking noises started. They came from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. We glanced around nervously, but none of us could find the source of sound. Well, all of us, except Greg. He walked, looking at the trail in front of his feet, still pretending that everything's fine. The clicks filled everything, except they weren't really clicks. Now, they sounded more like someone rhythmically knocking on a hardwood table. "Don't they sound like they're getting closer?" asked Julie silently after like half an hour. "I don't know, honey." I tried to sound indifferent with not much success. Cynthia was silently crying, while hanging on to Greg's arm like a drowning man to the last straw. "Either way, we should hurry," said Greg. He sounded defeated. Another hour passed, and I asked a quiet question that everyone's been thinking. Are we going in the right direction? I could swear I already saw that rock 3 times. "I don't know. I can't concentrate with this knocking." Greg started to sound scared. This was not good, but what should we do then? Before anyone could answer, Julie screamed. We jumped like springs, then all eyes followed her shaking arm, pointing into the woods. Something stood there, something large, and motionless. I can't believe this can't be. I could only whisper as I stared at the dinosaur standing between 2 trees. It was big, green like pine leaves, with white spots on its back, yellow eyes fixated on us, and yet motionless as a statue. A very familiar statue, in fact. Allosaurus. The seconds grew into minutes as we stared at the beast. It was clearly alive. I could see its chest moving with every breath, but it was still frozen in place. The hell should we do now? Nithya was surprisingly calm, considering she was on the verge of hysteria even before the dinosaur. Maybe the absurdity of the situation calmed her somehow. Walk away. Slowly. I was surprised by the rationality in my own voice. As I took the first step, the clicking continued. The Allosaurus' throat vibrated as it produced a sound. Then it started growling in a deep, guttural sound. It lowered its head and stared at us, the deep growl bellowing between the branches. That sound, it awakened something in me. Some little, mouse-like creature buried under millions of years of evolution in my DNA screamed at me to run. Run and hide. It's not my time. It is the time of the giant lizard, and being out in the open means certain death. I resisted. The dinosaur still stood there, baring its teeth and growling like a mad dog. Greg broke first. He bolted into the woods, dragging the screaming Cynthia with him. This was enough for me. I glanced at Julie and saw that same primal fear mirrored on her face. The moment we started running, a triumphant roar echoed behind us, and we heard the leaves rustle and the branches break as the Allosaurus launched after its prey. Us. I ran. I heard Julie beside me, and the Allosaurus after us. Branches crashed into my face and thorns tore into my arms, but I kept running. The voice of survival screamed danger in my head, and I didn't know anything else. I didn't know who was the woman running beside me. I didn't know who I was, or what I was. I just knew that there's a dragon behind me, and I only have one chance at survival. I don't know how long we run, or what direction, but at one point, a clearing appeared. There was no hiding place in sight. I had no choice. I burst out from the trees, like a gazelle, nearly feeling the teeth of the lion sinking into its body. The shock of seeing my car dragged me back into reality. One last sprint, while frantically searching for my keys, and then me and Julie finally got pulled out of the Jurassic era and back into the present, where no dinosaur should still roam the earth. The engine screamed to life, and at that moment, the Allosaurus emerged from the woods. It stopped on the clearing, staring at the car. I saw its eyes. It knew it lost. A roar tore the air apart, and the beast made one last attempt to reach us. I lost control again. The growl was just a warm-up compared to this. My brain didn't scream danger this time. It yelled certain death. Julie was stiff beside me, like a deer in the headlights. The Allosaurus sniffed the air, then slowly started walking towards the car. Its mouth opened, ivory teeth making high contrast with the pink gums and purple tongue. Saliva dripped on the windshield as the dinosaur lowered its head, looking right at us. Then it suddenly turned. Two figures appeared from the trees. They stopped on the clearing for a moment, turning their heads around, like they're noticing their surroundings just now. The Allosaurus left the car and started running toward them, its hind legs working like pistons. The spell broke again. I stepped on the gas so hard that I thought the pedal would break, but the engine roared, and we sped to the dirt road, bouncing like a rodeo bull, tires kicking up mud, engine lights glowing up. A quiet growl echoed from the forest. I'm writing this from a gas station. Julie is in the bathroom, trying to pull herself back together. I have no idea what to do now. I can't stop thinking about Greg and Cynthia. We left them there. We should go back. But I don't know if I'll ever be able to set foot in any forest again. Story 9. His gaze. He sat there, perched atop the curtain rod of my shower head cocked downwards, watching me. As I sat in the tub naked with water falling over me, I wanted to scream. I wanted to weep. I wanted to fold into a ball and crumble. But under his watchful gaze, I found every scream pummeled into a whisper, every cry choked into muffled sobs, and every attempt to cover my face thwarted. As steam curled around my skin and rose to the ceiling, I turned my gaze towards him, as I often did, and found the same haunting figure I had seen for months. His face poked out over the top of the shower curtain, angled down towards me. It was odd as always. Where eyes should be set only sunken holes. Where a mouth should have been was a flat, bare surface. He was covered in something that seemed like skin at a glance, but upon further inspection seemed to be nothing like skin at all. All that made a face recognizable was absent, and yet his gaze was unmistakable. I wasn't quite sure how I knew he was a man. There were certainly no characteristics about him that would lead me to believe he was. And yet, in my inner being, I knew that this was not the presence of a woman. It was unmistakably malicious, condescending evil, in a way that only man can be. There was no warmth to be felt from him, no love, no joy. He was cold, unflinching, and hollow. I didn't get the sense that he enjoyed the agony he inflicted upon me. I felt as though it was simply what he did, or rather perhaps what he was made to do. His face wasn't the only thing about him that I found strange. His fingers sat just below his chin, wrapped in a queer way around the curtain rod. They folded and bent at impossible angles with joints in the wrong places and edges where there should be none. I had once dared to peer behind the shower curtain at his body, and found it to be much the same. His shoulders twisted and contorted into geometrically unthinkable positions. His knees were a mess of twists and corners. His feet were contorted into shapes I couldn't describe if I wanted to. He was a towering figure of at least 7 or 8 feet, and yet his weight never seemed to crush the thin metal rod he leaned against. Nothing about this horror made sense to me, and yet everything did. He had arrived one day, quietly and without a word. I hadn't questioned it. His presence made sense. He had arrived when I was at my lowest, like a shark chasing blood in the water. I didn't know why he was there. I didn't know what he wanted. But I never dared to suggest to myself that he didn't belong. To suggest he had no place here would be no different than suggesting that a fox is no place in the forest, and an eagle no place in the air. He belonged here, though I wanted him not. He remained here, though I desperately wished he would leave. I sensed no greed or desire in him, and yet I knew that slowly, ever so slowly, he consumed me. He did not speak a word to me. The only noise I could ever hear was the hiss of steam and the draining of water. He simply fed. I could feel my strength wane day to day as I sat in that shower staring up at him. I slept less. I was disgusted by foods I had once loved. Music lost its beauty and color its vividity. I no longer laughed. I no longer cried. I simply was. All of the beauty of life was replaced with dread. I could sense my death coming, spurred on by this stranger in my bathroom. At times I would even tell others of its coming, begging for them to see him with me, pleading with them to believe in a horror that had so tightly gripped me. But perhaps he followed me in the daytime, leaving his perch on my shower rod to follow me. Perhaps he changed my words as they flowed from my tongue. Perhaps he warped my cries for help into platitudes and small talk. I begged, and I begged in desperation for someone to help free me of this monster. Yet it seemed my pleading fell on unconcerned ears. So, to death I resigned myself, and every day to the shower would I go. He stands at his perch even now, silent as ever, watching as the water pours over me. I don't know if my mind will go first or my body. I cannot take his glare any longer, but I haven't the strength to move. I'm sure one day someone will find me, will look upon my body. Perhaps it will be fresh. Perhaps I will be rotting, consumed by the maggots. Perhaps I will be nothing but bone. Whatever the case may be, I pray that when they find me, when they look upon me, that their gaze is kinder than his. Story 10. The dinner service. I have no idea how I ended up here. 1 minute. I'm completely broke, desperate for anything that'll put cash in my pocket. The next, I'm standing in front of a black metal door in an alley I've walked past 1,000 times. No sign, no light, just that door, humming like it knows something I don't, like it's been waiting. Some guy, I can't even remember his name, called it a dinner service. Said it paid better than any real job. Easy money, no experience needed. Just show up hungry. I laughed. Who pays people to eat? I figured it was some influencer stunt or underground food challenge. But he didn't laugh. Just stare at me with these hollow, sunken eyes, like he chewed glass and swallowed it. You want in? He asked, pressing a heavy black card into my hand. No writing on it. Just a raised symbol, like a scar. What's the catch? I asked. He looked away. Just knock, he said. They'll know. No explanation. No rules. Just that voice, part warning, part dare. I should have thrown the card away. But I hadn't eaten in 2 days. My rent was overdue. And something in me wanted to believe this could be real. An easy out. A last resort with a silver platter. I knocked. The door opened before I could step back, soundlessly, as if it had been waiting for my touch. Inside, the air hit me first. It wasn't just bad, it was wrong. It smelled like raw meat left to rot in the sun, mixed with rust and sweat. The scent clung to my skin, crawled up my nostrils. The room had a low ceiling, and buzzing fluorescent lights flickered overhead like insects struggling to live. A long table ran down the middle, covered in a filthy white cloth, set with plates and silverware that gleamed in the sick yellow light. Someone had tried to make it look nice, candles, folded napkins, but that only made it worse. A flash came to my mind. My mom's kitchen, her lasagna bubbling in the oven. Soft light came through the window, and the smell was warm and thick with garlic. Safe. Human. Then that memory faded, replaced by the smell here that felt like a fist in my lungs. The first person I saw was the server. Or maybe not a person. It wore a human face like a mask, stretched too tight in places and sagging in others, edges dripping like melted wax. The eyes behind it seemed alive, but wrong, too still and too black, watching me without blinking. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to run. But before I could move, the first tray slid toward me on the table. It hissed. Something in it hissed. I gagged. The smell, rotten and wet, sweet and disturbing way, hit me like a punch. My stomach twisted. My hands went cold. Eat, the server said. It wasn't suggestion or threat. It was a command. His voice was low and wet, like someone stirring blood. Eat or they'll feed you next. I wanted to scream, to run, but the door had already closed behind me. Silent. Final. I knew then I wasn't getting out. Not alive. I picked up the fork. My hand shook as if it didn't belong to me. The thing in the tray twitched. Fingers? Something like a hand. Maybe. The flesh quivered between my fork tines. My brain screamed, don't eat it, but my body moved anyway. I shoved it into my mouth. My jaw locked. My teeth sank, and it squealed. It squealed like it was alive. I gagged, choked, and swallowed. The taste, it was wrong. Warm and salty, like blood and iron. Still alive enough to make me want to rip my own tongue out. The second tray slid in. Bigger. Worse. The smell intensified. The others at the table, pale and sweaty with dead eyes, were already shoving it in their mouths like starving animals, tearing at it with their teeth, swallowing without chewing. Blood dripped down their chins. No one spoke. No one looked up. And the server, he was still grinning. By the third tray, I was shaking so hard that I could barely lift the fork. My stomach felt like a clenched fist, while clawing at my throat with each breath, and the smell, it had seeped into my skin. It was in my pores, in my teeth, in my hair. When I blinked, I could taste it. It was inside me now, like rot crawling under my nails. My mind flickered. My apartment, last night, the terrible instant noodles I'd eaten at 2 a.m., the soft glow of my broken lamp, the hum of my fridge, all those silly little comforts of a life I thought I'd lost. I wanted to hold on to that. I wanted to believe it was still real. But here I was, staring at a slab of, I don't even know what, twitching under the yellow light, like a heart refusing to stop. I wanted to run. God help me, I tried. My knees jerked under the table, but my legs didn't move. My hands froze on the fork, and the tray, it moved. Not like meat, not like cooked flesh. It seemed alive. It looked like it was breathing. Fingers curled, limbs jerked. Something inside shifted like a fetus in a womb. A wet, gurgling sound rose up around me, but no one at the table was making it. It was inside me, in my ears, in my teeth, vibrating through my bones. Eat, the server said, calm and patient, like a priest giving last rites. But I felt it deep inside my bones. This wasn't suggestion. It was gravity. Eat or they'll feed you next. The fourth tray arrived. That's when I saw it. The room wasn't just a room anymore. In the middle, where the light flickered the most, something was twitching. A mound of limbs piled like a grotesque puzzle, wet and breathing. Faces pressed against the edges of dishes. Lips moving, eyes rolling under sagging lids. Some whispered. Some sobbed. One of them hissed. I couldn't tell where the pile ended and the plates began. My gut dropped like I'd been punched straight through the floor. My stomach folded in on itself. My head swam. I thought, no. I refused to believe it. My brain tried to convince me it was something else. Trash, mannequins, props, anything but this. But my eyes wouldn't lie. I looked down at my own plate. My fingers trembled so badly that I couldn't tell if they were still attached. My jaw locked until it ached. My stomach screamed. I lifted the fork. My brain shouted at me to stop, but my hands moved anyway. slow like a puppet's. I stabbed. I bit. Warm, soft, slick flesh slid against my tongue. The taste salty, iron and alive, shot to me like electricity. And something worse. It was familiar. So familiar my heart stopped. The gurgling didn't stop. It came from the walls, the plates, inside me. Even the lights began to pulse with it, like the room was breathing through my skin. My mind snapped between memory and nightmare. My mom's lasagna cooling on the counter. The Sunday toast I'd burned last week. My last sober breath before everything fell apart. All those tastes, those smells, folded into the one in my mouth right now. And the taste, it was me, not a memory, not a metaphor. I knew it like I knew my own heartbeat. I froze. My stomach locked. My lungs forgot how to breathe. My mind screamed, denied, rejected. No, no, this isn't real. But my tongue tasted the truth. My fingers still trembled, still holding the fork. When I looked at the center of the mound again, the shock hit me so hard, I thought my skull might crack. My reflection, my own face pressed into pile, eyes wide with terror, lips half parted in a scream I felt echoing in my own throat. My hair matted with blood, my skin a slick sheet of meat. I blinked and it blinked back. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even blink properly. Denial rushed to me first. This isn't me, some sick trick, some mask, but the horror crawled up my spine. My humanity was slipping away like marrow pulled from a bone.